Public Library, the home of the Billings City Council for the next month or so, unless we can get over to the new building sooner. I did do a quick tour of the building. The City Council chambers look great. Your lockers over there look great. So people are moving in. Administration, I believe, is supposed to move in this week starting on Thursday. So all is moving ahead, but in the interim, we're here. For members of the public who may not know this is a work session of the Billings City Council. So at our work sessions, we don't make binding decisions. It's a more informal process for discussion, education, with the possible exception of giving instruction for staff, which may trigger a vote. But other than that, it's mostly an opportunity for discussion. We welcome you all. Normally, decorum and quiet is very important at these meetings. We will make an exception tonight in the case of anyone who wants to make an announcement about a touchdown for the Bobcats. And periodic updates on the score are in order at all times, including now. I mean, the game started half an hour ago, I believe. Do we have an update?
They're down 14-0.
The Cats are down. Councilmember Ripsis is out of order. Okay, our thoughts and prayers are with the Bobcats tonight, no doubt about it. Councilmember Raspenleiter is there as our representative, and Councilmember Kennedy is online with us. If Councilmember Kennedy, we fail to recognize you at any point, you know the routine, just go ahead and unmute yourself and interrupt. And if anybody sees his yellow hand go up, please let me know as well. We do not have former council member Denise Joy with us today because today was swearing-in day, and her resignation is effective today. So we wish her the very best in Helena. And remind everybody that we are taking applications for the Ward 3 vacancy for the next couple weeks. Fairly informal process. If you know good applicants, encourage them to send letter of interest, resume, letters of recommendation, whatever they think would be helpful to Wynette or to myself, and we will add that to the pile. Encourage them to come to our meetings. I saw that we already have TJ Rogers, who's with us tonight, who's sent in an application. So thank you, TJ, for being here. And with that, we will move into the first item on our agenda. There's a copy of the agenda back on the little red table there. Encourage all members of the council to keep your voices up. The little pizza box there is your microphone for Community 7 television. With that, the first item up is our public comment on any item, either on our agenda or not. We will have an opportunity for public comment on any of the 3 items that are on our agenda later. So unless you have to leave, I'd encourage you to hold off public comment on those items until we get to those items. But if you've got anything else or you have to leave, this is an appropriate time. Is there any public comment from the audience at this time on any item? If so, please come to the podium. We just ask that you keep your comments to 3 minutes and tell us your name and address. Any public comment? No public comment at this time, so we'll close the public comment period and move into our first item of business. But before I do, Chris, anything in the way of base preliminaries before we go to item number 1?
I think you covered it relative to the fact that the move to City Hall is underway. The building division moved in just before Christmas, planning kind of over the holidays. Administration is moving this week, so we'll continue to progress. The IT folks are on site this afternoon working on all the technology side of the council chambers. As you said, if you stand in there, you'd think it's all ready to go, and it is from a construction standpoint, but now we need to dial in the technology side of it. So that's what's going to happen over the next several weeks between now and then. At some point this month, we will reach out to you guys to come in and test and be a part of kind of test driving what we've got there before just starting into a meeting. So that's all that I would say, and welcome to 2025 and the new year. So I'll turn it back to you, Mayor.
Very good. Thank you, Chris. First item up then is our update on the Billings PCE petrochloroethylene Superfund site. Our environmental guru, Boris Kryzek, will kick us off there.
Yep. Boris is our environmental engineer for the city, and he'll introduce the EPA. And as some of you recall, we get a couple of these reports a year on the progress. So Boris, I'll turn it over to you.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. I'm here to introduce item number 1, which is a summary of the Billings PCE Superfund site project that has been. Is this better?
There you go, Boris.
Okay, sorry. Okay, so I'm here to introduce 2 individuals, one from EBA and the other from DEQ, to discuss the status of the Billings PCE Superfund site. The project has been ongoing since 2021, and so with that, I've provided a handout which talks about the site overview, the status, and then what mitigation processes that the EPA is looking at to address the situation. As part of this, the city will contribute to identifying the plume area in the affected sites, and that will be done similar to what the city has in place, which is the historic district, how we identify properties that have historic significance. It'll be set up similar to that, and then with that will be a notification either to engineering or to environmental affairs on these new construction sites, which will require some sort of vapor mitigation. And then building department will then ensure that there's compliance with that vapor mitigation set of standards that would be established. Depending on the EPA requirements on these sites, may require an amendment to the city ordinance to provide the city the authority to require that compliance with these EPA standards. We are not sure at this time if that is needed. So with that being said, I'd like to introduce Roger Hugerheid with the EPA, and he will get into the details of what has been done with the site and the investigations and the future mitigation and what areas of the city will be impacted.
Thank you, everybody. My name's Roger Hugerheide. I work for the Environmental Protection Agency. I'm based out of Helena, Montana. We have an office in Montana, and I've been working for EPA since 1992. So a little bit more than 30 years. I've been involved with the Billings PCE site from the very beginning. So everybody, I assume, has a 5-page handout. Is that correct? Okay. So first page basically gives a site overview. Second page, under Superfund, because this is a Superfund site, we have what are called administrative controls, and they're called institutional controls. And one of the things I want to talk with the council today is implementation of government controls and ordinance. So page 3 is the lines. So if you look at the map on page 4, you see 3 different colors. So area A basically is an area, there are, I want to say, over 700 residential structures in there and probably 30 to 40 commercial structures. In that particular area, we are going to offer every residential property a mitigation system. And when I say mitigation system, it's basically a radon mitigation system. In the instance, what we're seeing are high levels of contaminants. So the release occurred on 7th and Central. It's a dry cleaner release, and it's a chlorinated solvent, tetrachloroethane. And this particular contaminant, once it gets into the environment, has a tendency to volatilize. So it turns into a gas. Those gases rise, and then they hit like an impervious barrier. And in this instance, those barriers are the concrete foundations in people's homes. So those gases accumulate, and depending on the age of the structure and the integrity of the foundation, those gases have the potential to enter indoor air and cause health concerns. We've sampled over 200 properties within the entire area, not just area A. So it's a plume, and it's over 1,000 acres. It underlies over 4,000 structures, and we just tried to get a handle trying to determine exactly where the worst of the worst was through all that sampling. So what we're proposing to do is probably next month or in March, we're going to go out to the public and present what's called a proposed plan. We're going to present to the public our intent to basically mitigate these vapors that have the potential to cause concerns in indoor air. And what I would like the city to consider, so for the area A, what the state and EPA would like is any new construction within that area, we would like a requirement saying that as part of that construction, they need to install a mitigation system in there. And the other one that we would like the city to consider is if a commercial property is changed such that it becomes a residential property. And the reason why we're more concerned about residential structures than commercial structures is a person in a residence has the potential to be there for 24 hours, whereas in a commercial scenario, you're only likely to be there 8 hours, 5 days a week. So on the last page, and I'm trying to do this as quick as I can, I don't want to take a lot of your time, is an example ordinance here, and this is from the state of Alabama. So in section 1, capital city plume site area defined. So if you look on page 3, what we would basically put in section 1 is that language of area A. So that's what would go in there. Section 2, well restrictions. The city already has ordinance in place that nobody can use wells for potable use, and we're not addressing groundwater as part of our remedy that's going to be presented to the public in a couple of months. So we're going to strike section 2. Section 3, soil vapor barriers. There's already a vapor retardation ordinance in place within the city. What we would like as part of section 3 is just a note basically saying this ordinance applies to all new constructions. And then the other thing we would add is some language in there about mitigation systems with regards to any restricted uses. I did mention the change from commercial to residential, so that's what we would add in section 4. And then the requirements would be basically submitted in the institutional control plan. It would be accepted both by Montana Department of Environmental Quality as well as the Environmental Protection Agency. And with that, I would like to open it up for any questions. I did do kind of a very high-level summary of the site, so if anybody has any questions about the site, I'd be happy to answer those as well.
Thank you, Roger. Appreciate your work on this over the years. It's sort of a guaranteed full employment plan for you, I think, the rest of your career, I fear. Questions for Roger? Councilmember Kennedy and Councilmember Gulick and Councilmember Gulick or Boyette? Yeah, so go ahead, Councilmember Kennedy.
Yes, on the mitigation, and since the mitigation is going on and the people that own these properties, when they get ready to sell or when they're, if they have to do this monitoring and everything, what compensation do they receive?
There would be no compensation with regards to the government paying for it. Other than that, we would install the mitigation systems.
You would install the mitigation into their properties?
Yes, that is correct.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councilmember Gulick.
You mentioned the wells aren't relevant in terms of potable water use, but if someone were to dig a well for irrigation, is that allowed? And is it problematic, I guess, as well?
It is problematic, but the record of decision that we're going to be presenting to the public only addresses the indoor air, and it doesn't address groundwater. So if we were to basically say, city, please put those types of restrictions in place, I think it would open up both EPA, DEQ, as well as the city to a possible lawsuit. And let us proceed forward with a record of decision for groundwater. The Department of Natural Resources and Conservation has what are called controlled groundwater areas. We would work with Riverstone Health as a petitioner and DNRC to implement a controlled groundwater area for that. Does that answer your question?
I think so.
Okay.
Thank you, Councilmember Boyette.
Thank you, Mayor. Could you kind of give us the 1, 2, 3? What does Section 4 mean? And kind of just explain it. Certain uses.
And this is just an example. I had several examples. Some of them were like 20 pages long. And if I gave you 20 pages, you were just going to throw it back at me and say, we're not going to implement that. I wanted to do something simple. So in this instance, they have like a single block area in Montgomery, Alabama, where they're saying no daycares, no schools, those types of things. We're not requiring those types of restrictions. The only thing we would want the city to consider is if there is a change from commercial use to residential use. And if you look at the area, so it basically starts on 8th and Central, goes to Central to Montana, up Division to Clark, and then kind of does a few streets. There's probably not a lot of commercial structures that are going to change to residential. Most of the changes are happening more downtown in those instances.
Councilmember Rupsis?
Thank you. Have you already written the language for this ordinance and given it to staff, or is it dependent on them to write it?
Actually, all I wanted from the council is that you guys would even consider this before we invest the time.
Okay. Thank you, Roger. From my perspective, this is a no-brainer. Go forth and draft. But the details, or the devil's always in the details, of course, when it comes back to us. But a question for you. what's actually being required? The Alabama statute talked about a vapor retarder. I'm assuming, based on your earlier presentation, what would be required is the installation of a radon mitigation to cause the velocitizing of PCE. Is that all that'd be required?
That would be required. You already have a vapor retardation on the books. And we had talked with staff about that, and we came to the conclusion that even with the barrier, those gases would still accumulate underneath. It's not addressing the problem. That's why we wanted to take it a step further.
Okay, and if this would apply for residential new construction, we're not talking about requiring it for every residential property in the area, correct? Only new construction?
Well, EPA would be responsible for implementation of all mitigation systems in Area A on existing residential structures. That's our dime.
So our ordinance would require the installation in every residential property?
Nope.
No, only
Nope.
new construction?
Only new construction.
Okay, so do we know, you may not, but the definition of new construction will be very interesting, right? If it's a completely brand-new building, no issues about that. You might want to look at our zoning code, which deals with similar situations, because it might be that you've got to have a trigger somewhere between nothing and a complete new building. 50% of the value of the property or something like that. Do you know how new construction would be defined?
I hadn't put a lot of thought into it, but being in that particular area, so there is, one of the uses in that area is kind of like multi-use, where they like somebody purchases a home and then they basically compartmentalize it into like 4 or 5 apartments. And what I've noticed over the last couple of years is several people have raised the older homes and actually constructed new ones. And those would be the instances where we would see this type of ordinance being triggered.
Okay, I just raise the issue. We'll see what comes out. Councilmember Shaw, Councilmember Neese, Councilmember Gillett?
Thank you. So I also agree. This seems like a no-brainer to me. I think we should move forward. I'm just a little confused about where we're at in terms of the process. Do you need city staff or council to draft something? Is that going to come back to us at some point?
It would come back to you. At this point, it's pre-decisional.
Okay.
So we go out with what's called a proposed plan, and then we allow at a minimum 30-day public comment, but we can extend it depending on public interest. We would want the public to weigh in on this before we would get involved with the city. All we're looking for tonight is, yes, we're on board when you guys are ready to come to us.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you, Councilmember Neese.
Yes, thank you. Couple of questions. One has to do with these plume areas, specifically A, where you're requiring the mitigation in the area. As I understand, these plumes are moving, and over time, that zone will change. So does this mean that we will be updating the ordinance from time to time, requiring additional homes to have these mitigation or radon dispersing areas, and will the EPA be picking those up at that time, or is that going to be the homeowner's responsibility?
I don't believe Area A is going to change just because of the concentration. So what we found is a correlation between contaminants at about 50 parts per billion and a concern. So as that plume expands, so it comes out, so it goes out like this, right? So on the peripheral areas, you have very low detections, but state guidance, so state of Montana indoor air guidance that says if you have a detection, you need to consider it as a potential indoor air concern. So Area C on this map is the full extent of the plume, but only Area A, that red, is kind of the nasty part of the plume. So what I've noticed in this is we don't want to just say we're only gonna sample for area A. We wanna sample for everything, because what we're seeing is that when lending, so financial institutes are offering, a loan to a particular property, it's getting flagged as a Superfund site, and it's hindering the possible transaction of the property. So what we want to offer as part of all of this, and I think the people who are going to take us up on it are ones who are in the process of either selling or buying a property. So that's why we want to make sure that any property that's within that plume has the potential to be sampled, because that would show it's either, if it's contaminated, it would be on EPA's dime to put the mitigation system, not the owner or the seller. But if it's clean, then you have that clean bill of health, so to speak, from EPA as part of that real estate transaction. Does that make sense?
It does, but it doesn't quite answer my question. So these
Okay.
plumes move, they do move.
They
And
do move, yeah.
The concentration changes from time to time. So even in zone A, maybe wherever the zone, it's moving some, part of the zone, one end of the zone may become less concentrated, not contaminated per the stats anymore.
Yeah.
Will you be adjusting this map from time to time? How often does that happen?
It's hard to tell. What we're looking at for this particular remedy, it's going to be a 35-year remedy. And there we have what are called 5-year reviews, where we do checkups every 5 years on a particular remedy. And if you're looking for, okay, what's the answer? I say we'll evaluate it as to whether or not we'll adjust it every 5 years.
Every 5 years, you're going to be looking at it to
Yeah.
adjustment. All right,
Yeah.
that's the answer to my question. Thank you.
Okay. And sorry, I didn't quite get your question there.
Okay. And does that need to be in the ordinance where we're going to be looking to adjust it every 5 years?
If it needs to be adjusted.
Okay. And then the other question I had was these systems that are going in there. What's the cost of a system like that?
System installation for a residential property, we're probably looking at, and this would include sampling before and sampling after, $10,000.
And so any new construction, that's going to be it's going to be the owner's responsibility to put that in.
Correct. And just the installation itself is probably anywhere between $1,500 and $2,500.
So you're adding 10,000 plus to the cost.
No, they wouldn't have to sample. They would just install.
Install. Okay.
And they're not having to be covered up and stuff.
Right. Okay. And so there in these areas, there's probably a lot of not owner occupied, a lot of rentals. Is there anything in there that is going to make sure we hold the landlords responsible to keep these things operating? Because it's the once they're installed by the EPA, who's going to maintain them? Who's going to make sure they're operating correctly?
And it would be as part of an access agreement that the property owner enters into with EPA and DEQ. And what we've determined is, so let's say you have 700 residential properties in Area A. We feel probably 40% of the residences will not allow us into the property to even put the mitigation system in. So we're going to put a deed notification on that property. So should that property ever be transferred, it says EPA offered a mitigation system, owner refused, and then that becomes an issue between the buyer and the seller. So that would be one instance, and the other instance would be if a owner refuses access after the system has been installed, we would put a deed notice on the property at that point as well.
So that doesn't really, that impacts the value of the property of transferring and stuff like that. But what about the tenants or the renters or people looking for a place to stay that are now in this area? How are they going to be notified this is contaminated property that the landlord's not taking care of?
And I don't have an answer for that.
Is there something
Let
in the ordinance that can be done?
Brianna and I take it back, Brianna being from the state, and just kind of talk about it. I appreciate you bringing it up, and I understand what you're trying to get at.
All right, thank you.
Thank you very much, Councilmember Gulick.
Yes, I agree that this is something we should move forward with in terms of an ordinance. For context, what we would be requiring in this area is required in all but three, in new construction in all but 3 counties in the state already. Because there's, in the building code for IRC, there's 3 levels of risk, and all of Montana is in the high risk area except for Yellowstone County and 2 other counties. We're in the moderate risk in Yellowstone County, and but even I tested in my basement, it was above the threshold. I put a radon system in my house, it's 1920 house. It wasn't hard to do, but it's a passive system as well, it doesn't require any fans, and so it doesn't necessarily need a lot of maintenance or something like that. So it's something that is a best practice already in any case, and shouldn't require a lot of additional work.
Okay, very good. Any other questions for Roger? Okay, not seeing anything else. My sense, and no one's disagreeing, Roger, is that at this stage anyway, we're on board, so we encourage you to work with staff and bring something back to us.
All right, thank you very much.
Does the public get to ask questions?
Yes, yes. Okay, very good. Thank you, Roger. We will open up for public comment now, and you may need to respond to some of this. So absolutely. So if there are any members of the public who would like to comment on this topic, please go ahead and go up to the podium and speak loudly. Sir, could you go up to the microphone up there? Because otherwise they can't hear us. So, and we just ask that you keep your comments to 3 minutes and tell us your name and address.
Okay, I'll use my West Point voice. Is that good enough?
No, we need you to speak into the microphone. There you go. Perfect.
With a voice like mine? Oh. Okay. You said entry into the property for...
And sir, just your name and address?
My name is Warren Lee Usry. I'm a retired Army. 4145 Jasmine, Billings, Montana. Been here since they kicked me out in '98. I got old and crippled. But it was honorable at least. EPA wants to enter people's property, right? Are you going to cover the insurance for stealing?
Sir, if I can just ask you just to go ahead and pose your questions, and we'll ask anybody who wants to respond to do so. But go ahead and...
Well, this is an EPA question. Places like California, I know Fort Worth and Dallas has hit a lot. Yeah. From the people that steal off the porch to people like utility companies coming in. Hey, I'm with the utility company and the TV's missing.
Okay, we'll ask EPA to go ahead and respond. And if you can, do you have anything else? Go ahead.
On that subject, he needs like a couple weeks to look at the different examples that they're doing. Okay, and we got police here he needs to work with too. So I don't think he can answer that right off the bat. I enjoy a house that I've rented for 20, 25 years. I happen to know the owner. I know how much he paid for it. So my rent is $550 for a 4-bedroom house. It's going to go up here in a year or two because I paid it off. But when you have EPA and you have gas companies in these big cities, especially in the slums, you have a lot of people come in with tools. Hey, we're here to do this, and the TV's missing. So I'm wondering who's going to cover the insurance while they're there. Also, when you post signs for contamination, is that going to be street or somewhere inside the building? Going to work on that, or
I'll answer, just continue with your question.
Okay. Insurance EPA, and as far as entry, okay, are you going to give out 2-day notice, 5-day notice? That's it. That's the whole ball works.
Very good. Thank you, sir. Roger, hopefully you made a little list there. Go ahead and...
So first question had to do with stealing, and it's going to be a EPA contractor who would be the one who would be doing the installations. They do have insurance. I can't say with 100% specificity that it would cover theft, but I would assume that it does, okay, for purposes of trying to answer the question tonight. Okay, second question was, can somebody?
Notification.
Notification.
Oh, notification. Notification is whenever both tenant as well as owner allows it. So, you know, we're gonna be installing upwards to 400 to 500 mitigation systems. And it's a matter of when, the owner and the tenants would be available to allow us to install. So, there would be sufficient notification in those instances. And that would also apply to any type of sampling that would occur as well. So third question, somebody?
It was about contamination. Are you putting signs up somewhere?
We weren't planning to put signs up because in reality, when it comes to the actual indoor air that people are breathing, it's at low enough levels that it probably will not exceed the threshold that would require a mitigation system to be in place. My concern is that it's cheaper to put a mitigation system in. So let's say you have a property and they have screaming hot contamination underneath the house, but we're not seeing it inside. Pretty much, I'm going to inconvenience that property owner into perpetuity until those vapors are gone. And it would be more expensive for me to continue to sample the property than it would be to actually put the mitigation system in.
Thank you, sir.
Okay.
Very good, thank you. Any other public comment on this item? And anybody else? Go ahead and make a little line up there so we know who else would like to comment.
Good evening. Can you hear me?
Yeah, go, keep your voice up if you
Okay. Elizabeth Shoemaker, Home Builders Association of Billings. My address is 909 8th Street West. Also, let you know I'm a realtor. And this is of particular interest to me for those reasons. But this is, as a realtor, something we definitely disclose on our properties when we do sell, just because it does affect potential not potential value, but just the effects of the environmental quality of the home down the road. So it's good to hear that there's going to be something offered from the EPA in terms of a mitigation system. My question is, you quoted $10,000 for a radon mitigation system for new construction. That seemed a little high to me. In my experience, it seemed to be quite less than that. But I would say, my question is there room for, when it comes to new construction, for the EPA to also include the new construction in that grant or whatever the funding is that allows for that, just since it's still in the same area, so I feel like we should still qualify for those funds if there was going to be a new home on an existing lot, or if somebody was going to rebuild on a lot. That would be my, I would like to see that included somehow. And then also questions about the wells, especially the ones that are being used for gardens, things that people eat, out of. Is that water affecting those wells? Is that something we need to also include in our disclosures in terms of health and wellness of our clients and residents? And then I don't expect a lot of people to be drilling wells in the middle of the city, but if there were to be somebody that wanted to do that for their yard or something of that nature, what would be done in that situation? Is there going to be testing for the groundwater, that type of thing? And that concludes my questions. Thank you.
Okay, very good. Let's see if there's any other public comment before we ask EPA to comment further. Is there any other public comment? Then we could kill two birds with one stone. Don't see any other public comments, so we'll close the public comment period and we'll wrap up by just asking our EPA representative if you wanted to comment a little bit about the cost. I believe you said it also included some testing, and then new construction and the inclusion of there, and then disclosure issues.
All right, costs, when I said 10,000, that included sampling as well. So installation is probably, depending on the contractor, would be between 1,500, 2,500. Could it be offset by EPA? It could if the builder allows EPA's contractor to install it. So it's not like they could hire a contractor and get reimbursed by EPA. It would actually have to be an EPA contractor to install. So does that answer that particular question? All right, so you had an issue about the, the big thing about the buy-sell. Oh, and I get it, and we had a presentation with the realtor community. I get a lot of calls from realtors, I get a lot of calls from buy sellers, and I get a lot of inquiries from financial institutes as well. Which is why I'm trying to move as quick as I can, so once I have a record of decision in place, then I can get a contractor on board so that when these inquiries come in, we can kind of be, okay, we'll be out there on X day to help, the realtor and the buy sellers would kind of tell us, okay, we need to have it done by this date, and we would kind of work with them. So that's something that we'll try to work with the contract that I would put in place once I have a record of decision in place. Was there another question?
Well water.
About wells.
Oh,
well
about
water.
wells. Like I said, we at this point do not, I think, we can't restrict groundwater because the cleanup document, it does not include groundwater. Now, I've had instances where a buyer was purchasing a property and actually requested EPA sample the well, and we would continue to take those inquiries as they're presented to EPA. And with regards to new well construction, if somebody wants to put a well in and then have EPA sample it, we'd be happy to do that as well. With regards to like irrigating, this is a volatile. So a good example would be if you clean brakes, brake fluid, that smell, that's exactly what this particular contaminant smells like. But it volatilizes. So as soon as you irrigate, it's going to volatilize into the air. And given the concentrations that we're seeing in the groundwater, it in all likelihood will not absorb into the soils at levels that would be a cause of concern.
Very good. Thank you, Roger. Appreciate your time on this.
I apologize that I took more than 15 minutes.
Very important. Appreciate it. That then concludes item number 1, and we'll now move on to item number 2, our CPSM, Center for Public Safety Management Report. Council, this was in everybody's packet, so hopefully everybody's had a chance to read it. Members of the public who might be watching this, if they have not seen it, it's about a 150-page, very detailed report that is available on the city's website or as part of the city council packet. So we refer you to that. Chris, would you like to sort of introduce our presenters?
Yes, and I'll just outline a little bit kind of how we've got it scoped out as far as the presentation goes. So at the podium right now is Tom Wazorek. Tom and Wayne Hiltz are both with Center for Public Safety Management. Both were involved, those who've been around for more than just a couple of years, both were involved in our 2020 analysis that was done, which I think in most of what the feedback I've heard over the last several years was hugely beneficial to right-sizing our public safety mill levy conversation with the public. This time around, we've asked the team to focus on some key areas. So Tom is going to hit it at a high level. Wayne Hiltz, both gentlemen have decades of experience in law enforcement, and then Tom was crazy enough to get into city management for a little while before he wised up and created this organization. But, so both those gentlemen are gonna speak, and then from there, we're gonna hand it off to Captain Woolley. Captain Woolley is gonna cover the work that's been done and some feedback they wanna give to you, focused in patrol and on the record side of the house. Then Captain Mayo, who's Captain of Detectives. Captain Mayo is gonna cover some issues related to investigations and IT, and then we're gonna wrap up with Chief St. John. So, yeah, this is gonna be more than a 10-minute presentation. I mean, but I think as all you can appreciate, there's a lot of information here. It's been extremely important and valuable. I think the 2020 analysis, this analysis, we signed this contract, I think, in the spring of '24. They were here this summer, pulling data, meeting with staff, and ultimately got this report together in the fall. And so with that, I want to turn it over to Tom, and we'll just kind of, if you could hold your questions, unless it's something critical, we'll gladly go back and have anybody and everybody jump into helping to answer questions as we clarify things. So, Tom, turn it over to you.
Very good. I just want to reinforce that, holding your questions. We will have an opportunity, but after our police representation is done, we'll break it up into some topics and come back to questions. So you'll have an opportunity. Tom, go ahead.
Thank you, Chris. Mr. Mayor, members of council. I actually had cold chills as I came in and was listening to your presentation on EPA Superfund site, because during my crazy years when I became city manager, we dealt with the Superfund site for all 16 years. I think they finally did reach a final record of decision after 40 years. So I've been retired for almost 15. They finally got there, but so I broke out in cold sweats when I began hearing records of decision and all those things. They certainly made my years as city manager interesting and working with EPA. But I commend you and your staff for looking at the police department in depth. I mean, how we approach a project, and we've done about 450 of these. I was looking to see if the councilman, if I was to hand my back to him, or how we've done about 450 of these studies across the United States and Canada, 47 states, and about 350, 400 communities that we've worked in. There are 18,000 police departments in this country. So you're one of few that really have taken the time to look at how you should approach public safety. It's a complex area. What we see going on across the country are issues similar to what you're facing. How do we staff? How do we recruit? How do we retain? How do we deploy? And it seems like those areas are changing by the day. I was a chief of police, for my first 10 years before I worked my way down to city management, and the challenges that we faced seem to take longer. And today we're seeing things change almost weekly, sometimes monthly. Requirements coming down from states and federal. So we commend your department, and they've been excellent to work with. They pretty much opened the books, which is important for us to complete our work. We've gone into some agencies at the request of city councils and cities, and we had to file freedom of information requests to get data. That does not make our job easy, and it also impacts the final quality of work. So I commend your staff, I commend all of the people involved in your organization, and I commend their enthusiasm to want to make change. That's what probably has impressed our team most, is that they really embraced and said, we want to tackle these issues. They aren't all easy issues that we've recommended. We've made a lot of recommendations, but we think with their effort, with their willingness to work through these, that you'll position yourself to be one of the best organizations, if not the state, the country, certainly. I will turn it over to Wade Hiltz, who is our team leader and has been on site and working with your team kind of one-to-one through this whole process.
Thank you, Tom. And as the city manager indicated, I was the team lead on this project, but also on the 2020 project. And so I've spent a lot of time in Billings and enjoyed it. There's a lot of information. As the mayor indicated, there's about 170 pages in the report. There are 130 tables and figures. And so in the interest of time, and I'm sure that you'll have many questions. I'm going to be very brief and touch on just a few of the things that I think you'll have specific interest in. And then, again, we'll open it up at the end, and we'll be here as long as you like for questions that you may have. So let me talk about the scope of work quickly. It's a little different than the study in 2020. We were asked to look at staffing and workload for the basic patrol function, the community service officer program, which is an outgrowth of a recommendation offered in the 2020 study, detectives, the core detective function, the records section, and also look at records management and IT issues and how effectively they're utilized in the department. Added to this year's assessment was an examination of overtime expenditures to try to determine why they're at the level they are at and whether or not there are opportunities to make adjustments in the way the department operates to reduce those expenditures. So let me start with the fact that you have a very busy city from a crime standpoint. You all know that. And I bring that up because your police department is challenged. They are a very busy, hard-working agency. And when you look at the numbers, these are FBI numbers. This report actually is not, this table is not in your copy of the report. We get these numbers from the FBI, but they weren't published until after we did our assessment. And so because of this presentation, we came back and then generated this report, which is the most current available information from the FBI. And this shows the city of Billings. These numbers, these numbers are indexed for 100,000 populations so that they're comparative against the state of Montana and the U.S. numbers. These are numbers that are reported through by the agency through the state that agency is within, and then on to the FBI. And so they're filtered along the way. They are pretty accurate, but there may be some slight variations in it from the records that you may see in your internal agency. But again, when you look at it, you can see that both the violent and property crime rate and total crime rate, and this is part 1 offenses: murder, rape, robbery, aggravated assault, burglary, larceny, auto theft, and arson. Again, the major offenses referred to as part 1. You are almost double the state and national average, and it's just a reflection on how busy your department is in this city. So good news is, and some of these numbers you don't have, again, especially that of 2024. When we produced the report, we used 6 months information for 2024 because we didn't have access to the additional months. We updated this through September, and that is this column here is representative of the first 9 months of the year. So you're on par to be at about 4,700 Part 1 offenses. The upside of all this is that from 2019 pre-COVID, and then you saw it start to spike during COVID years. 2021, it peaked, and every year thereafter, it drops. And this number, when you get the numbers in the next month, will probably be maybe upwards of 500 Part 1 offenses lower than the 2019 or pre-COVID. So one of the things that we wanted to do was compare the data from our 2020 assessment. And we used 2019 calendar year data, and for this assessment, we used 2023 calendar year data. And as you can see, the number of calls per day have all begun to decline. A reduction of 5,337 calls for the year. And that's kind of consistent with the decline in the crime rate from the prior slide. Now, this is going to be tempered a little bit by the next slide. One of the things that, again, an outgrowth of the 2020 assessment was the creation of the CSO program. That program was really in its infancy in 2023, just getting started, but we wanted to show some of the numbers. It wasn't until late in the year, in the fall of 2023, before you begin to ramp up staffing in there. So with very few CSOs, they handled about 3,356 calls for service that otherwise would have gone to a patrol officer in that year. And so the total decline is about 2,000 calls for service. But again, it's reduced by 5,300 from that which patrol handled. And that freed up your patrol officers to go out and do neighborhood problem solving, target career offenders, be more proactive in this number is going to, this number, the 3,300, is going to dramatically increase, we anticipate, in 2024 as your staffing ramped up. At the time we were here, you had 6 of now 10 positions filled. And so as those numbers, again, at the beginning of 2023, I think you had only 2 filled. So again, those numbers are really going to change. It's really going to impact the workload for patrol officers. So staffing changes between the 2020 study and 2024. You added actually 32 new positions, a dramatic increase in the number of personnel. 4 sergeants, 18 new officers, and that includes 8 that are scheduled to be funded next month. Still, there are a number of people in various statuses of training, 10 officers, there's a vacancy. And interestingly enough, when we were here in 2020, you were authorized 78 in patrol, you actually had 80. When we visited in August of this year, you only had 74 people in patrol. You had 6 fewer people in patrol this year than you did in 2020, and that's because of the vacancies and the turnover. And so as these numbers fill in, your staffing numbers in patrol are going to. And then again, the 10 new CSO positions that will supplement patrol as well. So one of the questions that was asked, and we answered it in the report, but we just want to reiterate it here, and it's an important question, is whether or not you're adequately staffed in patrol, detectives, records. Specifically, those are the functions that we were asked to evaluate. And our conclusion is that when you fill these positions, today you're not adequately staffed. When you fill these positions, you will be adequately staffed to manage the workload that you face. So I wanted to touch base on a couple of other things that I think would be of interest to you, I'm sure would be of interest to you. We looked at a couple of areas that were of concern to us. We've shared this with the department, and they are looking at it, and they will be able to talk to that in a moment. But when you look at highest priority calls, critical and high priority calls, and you look at the dispatch period, travel period, and response time. So the dispatch period is the time the computer system, the CAD system, is set up so that when a call is received in the 911 center, the dispatcher makes a decision, or the call taker makes a decision as to whether or not a unit has to respond to a call for service at that location. As soon as they type the first keystroke into the call history, that clock starts. And that clock ticks, the 8.7 minutes, let's say, in critical calls, that clock ticks until a unit is assigned to respond to that call. The travel time is the period from which the officer that is assigned to the call spends driving to the call and arrives on scene. And the combination is the response time of 12 minutes. That is grossly excessive. we would like to see, and most agencies are in the 5 to 6 minute range, and these are critical calls for service. So there was some concern there, and we've talked to the department about it. They are looking into some issues that impact that, and again, we'll let them address that. But we know that you would be interested in that, and so we wanted to just highlight it here for you. Interestingly enough, again, is that it's actually the total response time is higher in 23 than it was in 19, and so it's trending in the wrong direction. So it does need to be addressed. The next slide is out of service time. In the 2019 study, as it indicates, there were 67,000 activities and 48,000 hours of out of service activity. Now, it's important to state that not all of that is unproductive activity. Much of it is tied to the court appearances or report writing. Nonetheless, that amount of out of service activity is extraordinarily high in comparison to other studies that we've conducted across the country, and we think it warrants consideration. We brought it up in 2019. The department's done a good job of reducing it. You can see that the 48,000 hours is the equivalent of about 23 FTEs, and it's been reduced to about 16, but it is still excessively high. And so they are looking at that, and again, we'll ask them to address that. In this slide, and you'll remember these from the report, this is the staffing or workload. The left column is the number of cars in the field at any given time. And then the bottom column is the hour of the day, so 1 a.m. up to midnight. And so what we see here, the orange are activities, so at midnight roughly, 6 officers were active handling community-initiated calls for service. About 1 to 1.5 were involved in self-initiated activity. It could be a traffic stop, an arrest, whatever it is. The magenta is the section that deals with out-of-service activity. And what you notice, these spikes reflect shift reporting and ending times. But what is unusual for us, normally those spikes are very sharp, they rise quickly and drop quickly, but in the out-of-service area, you see prolonged periods of time. So this is about maybe 4:30 at this point, going over to about 7 o'clock. There are as many as 8 officers that are out of service. That's an extraordinarily high number of people again, and so that leads to the amount of out of service time that we talked about in the prior slide. So the next slide, and again, this is just a sample from the report, shows some of the activity. What happens here, this is the time when there's a lot of out of service activity, and what you see here is a decline. This line reflects community initiated activity or workload, and so there's a large drop here, and what happens is that there's so many people out of service, wherever they are, out of service, that the activity really drops, and that, so you see that decline almost consistent with each shift change, where those bulk periods of time, out of service time, reflected in the magenta from the prior slide exist. So this the final slide for me to cover is the overtime discussion. We spend a lot of time, and I think the finance department, we work with finance and human resources as well as PD staff on these numbers and looking at the activities. I studied the payroll records for all employees for a year. There were 67,000 entries, and so I decided that was going to be overwhelming. So I looked at specific individuals, and so there are some recommendations that will be discussed shortly that deal with some of the concerns about issues that generate excessive overtime. I do want to point out that of this 250,000 that was budgeted, in 23-24, about, or 2,550,000, about 250,000 of that was special event overtime. That was a projection of, and this is fully reimbursable special event overtime. And as you can see, that the department was about $400,000 over budget in that year, but 250,000 of that they were over budget because of special events. So they were budgeted 250,000, but they spent 500,000 on special events. That is fully reimbursable. So this number is not quite as bad as it looks, but there are still a number of issues relative to overtime expenditures that could be controlled, and they were offered in the recommendations in the report. There was an extensive section in the report. I hope that you've all had a chance to review that. So finally, I listed the next 6 slides are recommendations. We created these 6 slides. These are kind of the highlights of the issues for patrol, records, detectives, IT, and overtime. And these were the recommendations that we offered to the department. We have been working with the department since we left. When we did our out briefing in August, we raised some of these issues, and we know that they immediately began working on some of those. And again, I'll leave that to the department to respond to. But as Tom said, there's been a lot of cooperation with the department. I have to thank Captain Woolley. He's probably tired of seeing my number come up on his phone, but they've done a lot of work, and so I would ask that now that Captain, if you would come up and you can respond to the issues. Again, these are our recommendations and their responses.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We'll turn it over to BPD and council. Just to remind you, you'll have an opportunity to make questions. So just so you don't forget them, you might want to write down your questions if something occurred to you. So we'll come back to those. But Captain Woolley.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor, members of the council. In the 2020 report, I had limited involvement, and it was a much larger report, expansive of a lot of the operations. Had the opportunity this go around to be the liaison. So for the last 7 or 8 months, I've been in constant contact. It's been quite of a process working with Wayne and his staff at CPSM, and the experience overall has been positive. And I'm very optimistic that a lot of these recommendations are good changes for our department to implement moving forward and stuff like that. That being said, like Wayne alluded to, there's a lot of information in this report, and over this process over the last few months, I myself have had lots and lots of questions, so I can only imagine the couple of weeks that you guys have had to try to process and digest some of this data. So what I want to focus on right now is basically looking at some of these recommendations and briefly talking about the actions that we've taken and then some of the goals that we have moving forward to kind of address some of these recommendations and implement them into the organization. So I'm not going to go line by line here on the recommendations. The big overarching concept or fundamental foundation that CPSM does when they come in, when they look at your operations, is they look at 3 key areas. They look at workload, deployment, and then 911 response times. And they all kind of interplay with each other, but these are good metrics for the department to adopt, to get to learn to use them regularly as kind of a thermometer of what our health is for the organization and services that we're providing. So that's the big thing that we're taking away is the concept of using this data for our organization routinely and not waiting 4 years between reports to act on some of this information. So as far as the workload goes, the workload is essentially, the best way to describe it simply is how many calls per day is an officer doing, how many traffic stops, how many proactive initiated things, how many reports per day, how many times are they covering, and they use that information for their calculation and deployments of where are you going to use your resources. So we have been able to, obviously we bring in the CPSM, they have their formulas, they have their calculations that they're paid to do. Historically in the past, we haven't looked at a lot of this data internally in the department. I'm confident to tell you that on the workload side of the house, that we have the ability to move forward and replicate the report internally so we can pull these numbers at least quarterly to use for our own calculations. So that's a good point for us to be moving forward to as far as the workload goes. On the deployment side, this is where you saw the graph with the magenta on there. That's the officer-initiated activity, availability for service. That was the out of service graph that you saw. The highlighted thing that they allude to in the report is the excessive overtime, or not overtime, but excessive out of service time for those reports. And one of the things that they allude to that ties into some of the 911 response times, one of the questions we have is do you have cars available to send to calls for service, right? And some of the report alludes to that those shift overlap or those shift change times and the shift change practices from officers getting ready to go home and officers coming on are a contributor to some of the delayed response times from call received to available units. And so when you're looking at that in solutions, one thing that we've already implemented, and like Wayne had said, we had started implementing a lot of these things as we're getting this information with those reports, but we've already kind of culturally started to shift some of the practices for end of shift activities to go finish your reports and then when cars are clearing on. So we've already implemented some of that. As one of the recommendation goes, there's a recommendation for shifting the shift times for overlap. And as you guys know, we work 3 10-hour shifts, which gives us only 6 hours of overlap a day to allow officers to finish some of their work and go home and bring new officers on. This year for 2025, we started the new shift today. We moved noon shift up ahead an hour early. So normally in the 2023 data, that shift started at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. We've moved that to 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and we've moved night shift ahead half an hour. And with those changes, we're hoping to decrease some of that out of service time. Additionally, we did reduce by about 30% the out of service time from the 2020 report. And we did that by a little bit better tracking of the data and where our officers are accounting their time for and some accountability for that. So we're going to tighten that up as well with some other methods to track officers' time spent on calls for investigations and purposes and stuff like that. The last part of this that kind of ties into the things is the 911 response times. As I mentioned before, that some of that out of service time is one of the contributing factors to the delay of the overall average for the high priority response times. But when you look at their numbers, we're overall high. You can see in some of their graphs that obviously our 911 response times are increased during the periods of shift overlap from one shift going home to the next shift coming on, but baseline, they're high as well. So there's some indicators for some other things there for us. And one of the things that I'll kind of point to here as we move on to the next portion of it, I'm going to go back a couple slides. One of the things that I want to point out that we've identified as well as the CPSM from their reports and their numbers is these high priority response times. In an optimal situation, when the 911 call comes into dispatch, your call taker takes the call, it's appropriately coded, as in the level of priority, so you can choose and triage where you want your officers to go to first, right? What I want to point out is it's been about 20 years since the PD and the dispatch center has actually gone through the call types to make sure that they're coded correctly. And this is something that we started looking into right away, and we were seeing other symptoms of the issues, especially this year in 2024 when we had some new dispatching protocols implemented that were causing some response issues. So one of the things I would like to point to your attention is under the 2-category priority. Remember, the overall data set that CPSM used for this study was about 75,000 calls for service. When you look at the high priority calls up here, there's 25,000 high priority calls for service. So that's 1 in 3 911 calls that are coded, that are telling the dispatchers that you need an officer now. And that is just not the reality of what we have. And one of the things that when we started digging into this, what we learned was that many of our calls are dumped into categories that aren't able to break apart. So for example, you could have a trespass call and a suspicious death, both categorized as a high priority call. In terms of resource management, we clearly want to go to the death call before we go to a trespass call, right? And so what we have going on is that you have dispatchers and officers trying to get to all of these high priority coded calls that truly aren't high priorities. And it's causing us to travel all over the place. You're getting officers and people who are saying, hey, let's hold that call. That's where we'll talk about here in a little bit, the call holding of the high priority calls. Because we are holding high priority coded calls right now, but oftentimes those calls are not coded correctly to begin with. So it would be that whole trespass. Do we send it to the trespass or do we send it to the PFMA first? But they're both coded as high priority calls. If you're trying to get to both of them, you're going to have some issues getting to all of them. So those are some key issues that we found. As far as the solutions for that, so for about the last 4 months, we've developed a targeted work group to, what we first did was we picked our most significant amount of calls for service that we experience. Those are disturbances and suspicious. By far, those are the most routine things that we go on a daily basis. And we recoded all of those calls, and we had numerous calls. I would say roughly probably 75 to 80% of those calls that were coded into those categories were coded incorrectly. So on December 16th, we implemented a change in the dispatch process of those new recoded calls in just the disturbance and suspicious category. And what we've seen is the numbers are starting to drop for the high priority calls. Officers have reported kind of a calming effect. They don't feel like they're getting sent from point A to point B, chasing all these high priority calls that really aren't. And right now we're in kind of I'm wanting to see the data that comes back. So we pulled 30 days of data prior to the 16th of December, and now we're going to wait for 30 days after. And we want to look and see what that does to some of our 911 times in those group categories that we changed. The plan moving forward is to go through every single call type and make sure that it's coded correctly as a priority call. So that way we can at least start to get cars sent to places in the appropriate triage, right? That's a heavy lift. Most of those calls, when the dispatchers take the information, there's literally thousands of call determinants, because even with trespass, you'll get several different layers of, is it in progress, did it just occur, is it cold, that kind of stuff. So there's lots of coding that goes into these. It's a heavy lift. But our goal is to go through all of them to get back to where we've gone through the entire system and make sure that we have the calls coded correctly for those. The next layer to that is when it comes to some of the recommendations about not holding calls or trying to prioritize those is our dispatch progression. And so we've got to get to a point where the calls are coded correctly for the main reason of we don't want to be pulling both of our Heights cars at 5 o'clock to go to just a trespasser who's refusing to leave at Hobby Lobby, right, on the west end, because we don't have any cars available. So in terms of resource management and being able to get to these calls faster and prioritize the truly legitimate high priority calls, we've got to go through all of those call priorities to fix that. And so that is in progress in what we are doing currently right now. I think it's probably going to take us another 6 to 8 months to finish the full transition with the new priority coding types, dispatch stuff. That is pretty much it for my notes. I'll be available for questions afterwards, but that's just kind of the higher level view of what we've got from the report and what we're doing and where we're headed with some of those things. And so right now I'll turn it over. Actually, disregard. I got the records to go over real quick. Here I am trying to get out of here real fast. All right. The next thing that I'm going to talk about is the records recommendations. This one is actually really pretty straightforward for us because they're all really good recommendations and fairly easy compared to the patrol ones. As far as prioritization of the filling of vacant records spots, that's a high priority for us right now. We have opening for 4 clerical staff members that we're accepting applications for right now. So our priority is to get those filled. We moved to the new City Hall building the first week in February, and with that move comes our CSOs and our volunteers from the Crime Prevention Center. They're going to come out of the parking garage downtown, and they're going to come into the facility. The plan is to start having volunteers work the window to help clerical staff with some of their workload with some of the front-facing counter calls and issues. The last 2 recommendations are specifically related to workload assessment and evaluation of clerical staff ongoing. Very similar to the workload assessment that they're doing for patrol about how many calls for service officers are going on, how many proactive activities. We are in the process of establishing the metrics and the framework for how many reports clerical is processing and how efficiently, and we're using that to be able to evaluate moving forward. So we're in the process of implementing this as well. So that's the records portion of it. I will now turn it over to Captain Mayo, and he will discuss detectives and some IT stuff.
Mayor, council members, thank you for your attention tonight. So, on the detective side of things, there's a few recommendations that really put us in a spot that we wanted to advance to, but we kind of had to slow down a little bit because we were waiting on some staffing. Currently, we're sitting at 14 as active detectives upstairs working daily caseloads, and we're looking to bump up to 18 here in the near future with the 2 bodies that were recommended from the previous study, and we're hoping to get those hired sometime February plus. But for right now, we're sitting at 14 and waiting on extra bodies to come in. So some of these recommendations, like breaking off into the extra compartmentalized units, like the high priority crimes against people, domestic violence units, stuff like that, some of those are just waiting on bodies. One of the things that I've asked my clerk to do, or my clerical to do, is to pull all the cases that went to detectives this year so that we can break them down by number into which of those areas they would fall, so help us decide how many people we need in each of those areas. So it's percentage worked out over the entire shift or the entire division, and we don't have too many staff in one area that's not a reasonable number to put in that area. So that is ongoing. As far as tracking how we do that, some of that gets very difficult simply because of the system that we're in. We have done a couple things. Lieutenant Sheldon has made contact with Kelly Bartholomew down in IT, and they're working hand in hand to develop a better way to put a dashboard together so that we can see a weekly distribution of new cases that come up for people as well as old cases that are still being worked on. That way we can track what each detective is doing on a more real-time basis versus having to run an old Excel style program and then just go to the old Excel, which is contingent upon user entry information as the detective sergeant would get it in the morning and then put it on their spreadsheet so it would be accurately reflected. In the new system, if we can get those dashboards up and running correctly, then we won't have to worry about a human error in that point because it'll be coming up from downstairs in the correct format, and then it goes to the dashboard so we can see it, and it's much more readily usable and digestible for our tracking on those cases as they come in. One of the things that is going forward right now, it's slow, but it's moving forward, is the development of the CSI unit with some of our help from our techs out at Evidence. We have 2 techs out there that just finished training, so they are now able to go and respond to scenes if requested to do photographs and fingerprinting. They are already helping at Evidence when vehicles come in for search warrants, so they help with the searches on that or help process evidence that comes in large quantities that are down there. Help take that workload off the detective so they can get freed up to go work leads. Right? Now, that process is going to be it's going to be in the work for a while. It's going to take a little bit of training, and by a little bit I mean an extensive amount of training. Earlier today, Wayne was kind enough to print me off some of the extra duties that a lot of your crime scene units do, and it's everything you see off of some of the big major units on TV. It's pretty cool. We'd love to get there. We're not going to be there for a while, but we're pushing toward those types of developments. So that will be coming in part as we get bigger and get more funding and more training. I'm going to switch down to IT. That was one of the studies also, is to help have an IT person integrated with our office, the way we read it, specifically mostly for a training aspect. That position was never actually filled. That was out of the last public safety mill levy. The training position didn't actually get put into place, but the use of a public safety position being housed with us was discussed. I did go to IT. I spoke with Mr. Watterson, as well as a couple of the other IT personnel. We're not sure we're going to push for that at this point. It does have good merit for us to be able to walk literally just down the hall and grab one of our specialized IT people to come help us with those problems. However, it's really only beneficial to the day shift specifically, because on a normal time, whoever would be there, probably Casey, would be going home about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. We would be able to leave stuff for him and pick it up for him for the morning when he had done it the next day, but it doesn't have somebody all on a 24-hour cycle, so that wouldn't completely take care of all our problems. There is some benefit to leaving that person down at IT, because if they have a problem or they have other network issues that have been popping up and that are also affecting us, then that IT, they get that group chat going on where everybody knows what's happening down there in order to keep the systems up and running for all of the citywide. In addition, that person usually assists with other city tasks as needed when not working with police stuff. So it is a position that we think that would be beneficial to us. However, it's not a deal breaker. We're going to continue talking about it and see how it goes. And if we decide there's something we really want to push for, then we'll do that in the future. Those cover my basics that I wanted to get out for you. A lot of it is being implemented and continuing to develop, but it was absolutely not at fruition at this point.
Very good. Thank you, Captain. Chief St. John.
Mayor, Council, good evening, and Happy New Year to you. I think, as you can see, that running a police department is extremely complicated. It's nice and easy to get in your car and go out and do stuff. But very talented crew here. I'd like to thank CPSM. Always enjoy having them in. We are not so arrogant and know everything that we're not going to take ideas. You get so close to something sometimes, and the question is, how come you do it that way? And all I can say is because we've always done that way. And so these are great ideas, and a lot of things we've implemented. Made some good progress, but certainly room to improve. On the overtime side, I don't think we have a slide for that. So there are recommendations here. We have 9 of them total in your packet there. Won't touch on all of them, but suffice to say, I think what was identified is that we have an extremely complicated budget process. I think you're well aware of that, and that transcends down to the police department. So much so that your police chief thinks there's 30 days in December. Somebody pointed that out on a slide. So we'll get that squared away. A lot of this is really decentralizing our overtime management, if you will. We have always controlled our budget and had a handful of people that were looking at things and keeping track of things. And when we're finding a 24/7 operation with different shifts, a lot of different ads, a lot of different specialties, we lose track of some of those things. And so what the recommendations have been, essentially decentralize that, give some of that authority to our captains and lieutenants and our specialized positions, give them the training, give them their authority, and push that down for tracking. That has been done. The other thing, very simply stated, we needed to improve our communication with finance and Andy's staff. Specifically when we have people moving from one position to another, which encompasses some sort of pay change, and we don't notify payroll, then that ends up in some situations. The other thing that we look at are what are the main drivers for our overtime expenditures. As Wayne indicated, we have a lot of reimbursables that are outstanding that we need to get back in there. But also we have a lot of specialized units that train on days off, because otherwise we would be taking them from their regular day jobs. So we pay overtime for those specialties. And then I think one that is gaining some traction, and we're looking at it very hard, would be our background investigation process. As you can see, we're in a constant hiring cycle, and so we definitely need to have those backgrounds done. And those are officers that are being pulled off their shift, and then they're sent all over the place to do backgrounds. And a lot of times we have to backfill for that. So recommendations are to hire retired officers to do that, and there's benefits there. So suffice to say, the recommendations are we concur with the majority of them. There's a couple that involve the union contract. We have a lot of pays in there that add up, and if we're not paying attention, we could end up in a situation where paying too much for things that we shouldn't. We've corrected some of those. So at the end of the day, paying close attention. The report out of finance today, we are on our salaries right now going into January. We have 52% of our salaries still available. So we're trending the right direction on where we are there. Again, we don't want to get stuck in the I've never blown my budget. I want to make sure you understand we're looking at the process, and then we're looking at things that are driving the overtime with that. And here's some more of those. Again, we concur and are working on them, a couple of them. We need to coordinate with finance and certainly the union when we get into negotiations, which is coming up this year. Just as a finisher here, again, apologize for the 30 instead of the 31, but this really kind of goes in line with some of the statistics that Wayne presented for you. This would essentially be, your first glance at what we've got going on here through 2024. So you can see that our calls for service have gone down. That is consistent with the information CPSM provided. Again, there's reasons for that, the CSOs, and the fact that our crime issues are going down. We're not having to deal with so much stuff. That reflects a 4.5% decrease over 2023. Important, and to what you are most interested in all the time, are violent crimes. We're seeing a continued reduction there, trending the right direction, 6.7, 14.8 on the property crimes. So again, we're making really good progress with what we're doing. Our strategies are solid. The work that's going on has been excellent. We have a re-engaged justice system. I think you're seeing that. We're able to get a few more people into jail. The courts are active. We're seeing some pretty significant sentences coming out of district court specifically. I think those judges are tired of seeing some of the same people. All arrests there, basically what that reflects, both adults and juveniles. 22% decrease in the juvenile arrests, that'd be the green, and up a little bit on the adult. But what that reflects is a 2.7% decrease in arrests over 2023. So once again, the work that's being done is paying dividends, and we're arresting less people, which is good because we're also seeing less problems. And knock on wood with that. Again, engaging the citizens here. This is one of our strategic objectives, is to continue to work on our traffic safety. Got some more citations and warnings going. And also in your packet, I believe should be a to-date staffing. Councilmember Rupsis is always interested in what that looks like. Is that in the packet? Didn't see that, okay. So we're doing really well. We're getting a lot of people in the front door applying for jobs. We have 6 that are going before the police commission this week. If they all get out of there, they're going to the academy. Another 6 coming on board. We are now situated financially and have authority from Andy to bring on the additional personnel that was authorized last budget. So we go from 167 authorized to 174, and constantly trying to keep those going. So we're, again, we don't have butts in seats. We've got people on payroll, but we'll get there eventually. So with that, Your Honor, that concludes the presentation part of it, and I will step down. I'm sure there's questions for the content experts.
I'm sure there will be questions. Chief, thank you very much for your cooperation with CPSM. Thank you, CPSM, for your diligence over these months, and for the crew at Billings Police Department. Job well done. Back to Council. Council, my recommendation on this would be questions. There's so many topics here, right? And one question on one topic tends to trigger other things on a topic, and if we bounce between all these topics, it's going to be a little more confusing. So what I would recommend is that we break us into 3 categories, and I'll just ask for questions in each of those categories, and we'll open it up at the end of our questions for any public comment. So the first category I would suggest is, broadly spoken, and the lines aren't going to be perfect here, but the people. People who wear uniforms. So that'd be issues about patrol and response times and out of service time, that you heard about and that you read about. Staffing levels, so people. People with uniforms. The second one would be people armed with computers. And that'd be sort of the civilian side, the records, and the IT component, quite a bit narrower. And then lastly, this issue of overtime. So if we can do that, and I'll, since we're going to have probably a lot of questions from a lot of people, I'll just kind of go around the table and on each of those categories. So if we can start and do it that way, and please identify, if your question is for somebody in particular, who it is that you would like most to answer your question. So Councilmember Rupsis, if I may, and looks like I don't see Councilmember Kennedy with us anymore. If he pops back up, please call my attention to Councilmember Kennedy. But with that, Councilmember Rupsis, can we start over here? We'll just go around the table and then come back on the next segment.
Thanks, Mayor.
And if we can, rather than have an infinite number of questions, can we keep it to 2 questions per category at this point? Councilmember Rupsis?
Perfect. Two questions. First, probably starting with Chief. In your observations, the comments and actions that you're taking in that document, a couple times you represent culture shifts as some action that was needed, specifically around end of shift and the background checks. What does that mean? What culturally needs to change within or is changing within the department to save a lot of time?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I mean, essentially on the shift part of it, historically, and it's been going on since I hired on back in the day, is when the next shift came on, the on-duty shift immediately went to the police station to do reports. And then, of course, some of that just sits around and talking. And that has been going on, and it still does. And that's what's reflected there, is that you see a shift come on, and the other shift goes up to do their paperwork. This is part of the reason why we moved the start time, so it'll stagger that a little bit and spread things out. And the other thing is that our officers have to do paperwork. It is tenfold worse, better, more, whatever you want to call it, than when I started, and it's required. And if we say you can't do reports while you're working, you got to wait till your shift's over, now we're into an overtime situation, and we don't want to do that. So a lot of the things, when we made the significant improvement on the out-of-service time was simply having the officers correctly identify that they were out working on a case or doing a report. Before, they would just say, I'm at City Hall. We have some 10 code stuff. And when CPSM looks at that, if you're not out on the street taking a call, you're out of service. And so we want to say, give them credit for what they're doing, and that's what was referenced there. So changing the culture of one shift comes on, other shift heads to the police department, that's what we're talking about there. Another one is, again, working in conjunction with the communication center, is, we're not going to send a car off a beat. We're going to wait till the beat car goes so we don't get people all over the place. Or the other culture is just first car available, send it across town. Those are things that working with them, doing the coding, keeping track of our people, doing the deployment will change that culture. That's what we're referencing in those specific things.
How about the background checks?
Background checks, historically, it's been sworn officers. It's collateral duty. We send our officers to training, or they get selected. When we have a hiring process and we have officers to go to in the backgrounds, we pull the background investigators off their day job and we send them for a week or two to go do backgrounds on people. A lot of them, they're out of town, a lot of travel, and that's where we get overtime there, but then we also have to backfill. And so again, changing the culture is to explore other models, which are, and one of them which is referenced is retired police officers. To go do that more on a contract basis and use salary savings to pay, for example. And then we don't have to pull people off the ship. Now we're going +1 over there, and it works out better. So again, breaking what we've always done.
Thank you.
Anything else?
Yeah, I'll take my second question.
Go ahead.
Probably
Get
for
in
our
kind of this
CPSM.
people world.
Yeah, for our CPSM. One of the things I was hoping that we'd get out of this is some type of, staffing model that we could use to say, something more than our gut says we need more officers. I'm not seeing that in this report. It doesn't sound like it was something specifically called out in your scope. But is there anything in here that we can take to, I think I heard you say we're adequately staffed where we are right now.
Yes.
So is there anything that we can take in this to use over the next couple of years
Sure.
as we try to wrestle with those decisions through
Sure.
upcoming budgets?
As we look at the staffing model, we look at the rule of 60. There's a lot of information in the report on the rule of 60. And that there's two parts to that. One, the first part has to do with the percentage of the workforce that is assigned to the core patrol function. And the second part is that they not be committed to more than, on a regular basis, committed to more than 60% workload. So that 40% can be proactive time. Right now, you're hovering, it's maybe just above 60%. But in our model, and we did include that in the report, it's 170 pages, so it's easy to miss it. But in the model, we indicate that with the hiring of the positions that have been authorized but are not yet filled, that percentage is going to drop to about 49.8. And again, that is in the report. And we believe that with the efficiencies created by managing more effectively the out-of-service time, that it will probably drop it closer to 45%. And then as it relates to patrol, it's going to potentially even drop more because your CSOs are taking a lot of the workload and will be taking a higher percentage of the workload than they have been from the patrol officer, again, freeing up the patrol officer time and to give them more uncommitted time. And so the report does indicate that the percentage you want to be below 60. I like to be below 50. I think 60, you're right at that threshold, and basically they're just waiting for the next call. They've stopped working. They're just waiting. They're just saturated. So when you get below 50, you're going to see more proactive time. And as you hire these additional people, And then again, the shift from patrol officers to CSOs of some of that workload, I think you're going to be in the 45% range for. But most of that is reflected in the report.
Yeah, so sorry if I could just follow up on that.
Go ahead.
So you've talked specifically about patrol, but there's a lot of the rest of the department. Do you think the department overall is staffed appropriately? Detectives, record keeping, I think was referenced. We might need, some additional resources.
Well, you're in your record section, for instance, you've got 4 vacancies right now, and they're understaffed with the vacancies. But once you fill those vacancies, they will be adequately staffed, and your records manager concurs that they don't need more people, they just need to fill the vacancies that they have. With detectives, we made a recommendation for a couple of extra people. One of the challenges with detectives for us was that your records management system, and it's not unique to Billings, this is an issue that we encounter in virtually all of our studies, but your records management system did not allow us to extract information on workload for detectives. The number that they gave us, and I didn't include it in the report, the number that they gave us of cases per detective, we noticed that cases are assigned to prosecutors, but actually detectives are working on those cases. So we couldn't really accurately measure the workload. So what we used is our experience. There were 3 members of our team here. We looked at our experience in dealing with other agencies, including our own. I worked in Pasadena, very similar in terms of population and workload demand. And so I looked at our agency and the staffing there and your agency. We did recommend additional staffing for detectives as a part of this report, and that will come on when you hire additional people in the next month. So we did look at all of the sections that we looked at. Again, for this, the scope of work was patrol, detectives, and records. We did look at the appropriate staffing levels for all and addressed all in the report.
So the detectives, the couple that you've recommended added, that's already been authorized? Yep.
Yep.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Very good, thank you. Councilmember Boyette on this issue of uniformed personnel in particular.
Captain Willie, do you have a minute?
And if I can just interrupt with very important information, the cats were down dramatically, 21-3. Councilmember Tiswell informs me that they have fought back to 21-18, still down, but only 3 down. So go Cats. Yeah, what quarter are we in?
We're in the third quarter, 40 seconds left.
Okay, headed into fourth quarter almost. Back to Captain Woolley.
So you talked about the high priority response time for the high calls, but you didn't talk about the critical. And they've averaged about 5 calls a month, and it's gone up. So does that mean that the person who takes the call is taking longer to type it in, or does that mean that we can't decide who to dispatch? Can you relate, why would it take 2 minutes longer to dispatch for a critical call, which hopefully they understand what a critical call is, then what is that? What is the problem there? Is it training? Is it communication between them and the officer? How do we explain that to the public? For critical calls, there's only 5 a month.
Yeah, Mayor, council members, Councilmember Boyette. So all of the calls, when I was talking about the coding of the calls, virtually all of the calls from critical to the low priority have some degree of miscoding, to include the critical calls. There's multiple factors that, like Wayne was talking about. From the time that the 911 call is received, the clock starts, to when the officer is dispatched. There's a few factors that are going to play into that. One is obviously dispatcher training, proficiency, the program, their staffing levels, their ability to, if you go into the call center at any point, they'll be juggling 3 or 4 911 calls. They can't let the phone just ring. So if they got limited amount of call takers, they might have to get a little bit of information. Please hold. 911, what's your emergency? Get some information, and then they'll triage through those. So some of it is staffing on their end, but specifically to this report, They look at whether or not units are available. And so I think some of the points that the report points out is that some of the things, the reason why we're not available is due to the out of service time. The other portion of officers not being available is we're running all over the place chasing these high priority calls that really aren't high priority, and are we even available to go on them? So we might be out dealing with a trespass call at Walmart, but then a theft in progress comes in at Winco. But you've got officers who are already out with dealing with people. So part of it has to do with us pulling cars from all over the place to deal with these high priority calls. And so the answer isn't really simple in that process of what we do in the whole times, because you can see clearly in the report that once officers are dispatched there, we're not having problems getting them to the location. And if you look at, and here's why I think a large portion of this is coding and correct data, right? Because anecdotally, right, the data is showing that we have an excessive call hold time before an officer gets dispatched to it. But I think that that's a symptom of so many miscoded high priority and critical calls proportionally, that when we run those numbers that it's skewing the data, right? Because we'll say, hey, we're not going to that high priority call right now because we've got other high priority calls. And a lot of that triaging is done by the officers and the commanders. And that's one of the things referenced in the report is that they're holding high priority calls. Well, to the officer and the sergeant, that's not a high priority call to them versus going to the other ones, right? So one of the things, and I think, let me, if you guys have the report up, one of the things that I want to point to that kind of helps highlight some of the coding, if you go to page 37 of the PDF document, page 28 of the report itself, and one of the things that kind of helps lead me to the belief that a lot of this is some of the coding that affects some of these numbers is if you look at our injury accidents in table 4-5A, if you look at injury accidents, our officers, the dispatch time is 2.9 minutes with a travel time of 4.4, which is the accident injury classification is considerably different than all of the other call categories. Anecdotally, what I'll tell you right now is my experience when I'm on the streets and I'm listening to the radio, my officers are clearing to go to the weapons complaints, to the robberies, to the crimes in progress. They're going to these calls, they're triaging them, but they're also very busy trying to get sent all over the place by dispatch to all these other high priority calls. And so when we look at these numbers, it's like, wow, what are we doing? But my belief is part of it, not all of it, because with us trying to chase all of these high priority calls around, are we missing getting to a true high priority categorized call? Yes, we are, because of how everything is coding, absolutely. But I think when we look at the numbers, some of the things that drag in these process times down ours is that quite simply, we should be holding these medium priority calls quite a bit longer, and that's affecting them because they're coded as a high priority call, right? So I think part of it comes into junk in, junk out. We really didn't give the CPSM really good data for these call sets because we just don't have the calls classified correctly. So that's part of it.
Anything else, Councilmember? Okay, Councilmember Tidswell?
Please. Did you say you have a process in place, or you're looking to tweak that priority? And could you go over how you're doing that, or what you're doing to tweak that process?
Yep. So to fix that, the first step. So one of the things that's not in this report, and so this I think is the time for us to give some context about what we're doing. So in 2023, we didn't have so dispatch this year in 2024 adopted a priority one dispatch protocol system, where the dispatchers systematically go through the process and it codes calls for them for service. That system was not in place for the 2023 data set. Okay, and so really kind of what we're looking forward to now, some of the symptoms we saw before the CPSM started the report, is we implemented the Pro QA, the new dispatching priority stuff. And they already have the calls mostly categorized for us to what's critical, what's high, what's medium, what's low. They use a different terminology for it. When we implemented that and we flipped the switch to the system, it really kind of pressured the system, because what we have as an issue is the call system that dispatch is using that categorizes the call has to be put into our CAD system. Well, the CAD system only recognizes the call type and its status, right? Whether it's in progress, not in progress, or whatnot. What happened was the mapping to those calls from the new dispatching system, the calls were coded correctly, but they were mapped to the old call types. So we were getting lower priority calls that were triggering send nows. And the feedback from our officers was they're putting 120 miles on their cop car a day, they're chasing from call to call to call. And the first symptom that I saw when we started looking into it it was the medium priority calls that we pulled that were causing the problems in the system. And so we made a change that helped it a little bit, but then we get the feedback from CPSM with the out of service time, with these high priority calls. Back on this graph, obviously it shows 25,000 calls. So 1 in 3 says you need an officer now. So that's kind of like the precursor to it. What we've been doing over the last 4 months is the first thing I did was looked at all of the calls for service that we go to the most. And by far, like 10,000 calls for service, 15,000 calls for service a year are disturbance and suspicious. And what we did was we pulled all of the call types that fed into those. And I think the best way to describe a disturbance call or a suspicious call really is kind of a dumping ground for the police department because we just don't have anywhere else to put it. And I think what we need to get back to is we have to prioritize crimes in progress, obviously against people, then property, that kind of stuff. And so we had numerous call types dumping into, let's say, the disturbance and suspicious, but because CAD only recognizes them as in progress or not in progress, you would have a disturbance, a physical disturbance in progress, and a trespasser, and they were coded exactly the same, right? So what we've been doing is we're going through and we're expanding those call type codes where in disturbance, now we've got disturbance physical, disturbance verbal, disturbance in vehicles, disturbance. And so we're starting to break those down into categories where we can prioritize those. Super heavy lift, but on the 16th of this month, we sat in dispatch while we implemented the new system. And it was kind of validating, to be honest with you, because we started seeing all of the disturbance and suspicious calls that we recoded being categorized correctly. But it also highlighted now we're seeing problems in other areas. So, like I said, it's been over 20 years since the department and dispatch has gone through and reprioritized and refiltered those categories. And the goal right now is to get through all of those to where we're dealing with a good set of numbers that officers are getting to high priority calls. The other thing that you have is, like the chief had said, it's the way that we've always kind of done it. And I think what we're seeing is some fatigue from the department, from the officer level to the commanders, that they've just been running call to call to call to call, chasing all these inappropriately coded high priority calls. And so for us, when we go, yeah, we're not going to go to that call, that one can hold. On the ground level, the guys are trying to prioritize what they're getting to. On the data side and from dispatch, it looks like we're just not going anywhere because we're sitting on it, we're holding calls as far as that capacity that goes. So that's the process. It's a big lift. We've got a task group. That task group consists of IT, dispatch, and the PD, who meet weekly to make adjustments and changes and create the programming and all that kind of stuff and run test modules. You've got to test it in the test side before you go live with it. That way we're not making major errors and stuff. So that's the process.
Go ahead, Councilor Tisdale.
I don't know if you can answer this. Is there a shortage of 911 operators?
I do believe that, I don't want to speak specifically for them, but I do believe that they are understaffed.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Council, I'd recommend we just keep going. But you should feel free to take a break. Personally, just step out at any time. Okay, I've got just 2 quick questions for either Tom or Wayne. The first one is you've heard some discussion about, a lot of discussion about coding high priority calls. Is there any sort of objective national standard for how to do that? Because we got one kind of apple and we're going to change our apple, but you're trying to compare it against other communities and how they define high priority calls. Can you just address that issue about objective standards? And then second, when should we have you come back next? I hope, and not immediately, but I think we can all see the value of sort of a reporting process. You can't answer that question perfectly, I know, but typically, what would you think that we should focus on? How much time should we have before our next report? Go ahead.
Well, let me take the second one first then. You know, I think this window, this 4-year window, gives the department the opportunity to implement some of the recommendations. Some of these recommendations, like the setup of a crime scene investigation unit, is going to take years. These aren't days, weeks, months, tasks that are being offered. And so I think a 4-year window, and Tom, you can correct me, but I think a 4-year window is probably fair.
Good. And then how about coding high priority calls? Are there any sort of standards for that?
There is not a standard, and I'll just give you a simple example. When Colorado legalized marijuana for recreational use, the state of Wyoming required departments to prioritize any marijuana call as a priority 1 call because they were concerned about the impact of Colorado's new law. And so when I did a study, did a couple studies in Wyoming, I looked at the calls, and again, there was somewhat of an extensive period or delay in dispatching some of the calls. And what the dispatcher said is, we know the state wants marijuana calls to be priority 1, but we can't, somebody's smoking a joint behind a bar, we don't want to prioritize that over an assault in a family home. And so there isn't, that's I guess the long answer to the question. There is no national standard. What I always say in every study I conduct is that in-progress crimes, there are not that many in-progress crimes, actual crimes. We're talking about shoplifting, robberies, assaults, that are reported. Many, the highest percentage of calls that we respond to in law enforcement are cold calls. You know, the car's been stolen, I came home to a burglary, or they're not major crime in progress. Maybe a domestic dispute but without violence. So in progress calls and life safety calls. And that may be a baby not breathing, maybe a traffic accident with injury. But that's the criteria that I have. Life safety and in progress crimes.
Very good. Thank you very much. Councilmember Rowan?
Thanks. So, Captain, I'm trying to kind of reconcile all of this, and so I'm going to ask a really convoluted question, and I'm sorry about that. But before I do that, I just want to clarify real quickly. When you talk about the miscoding and the high priority calls, do you believe that also affects response time for those critical calls? Okay, so help me understand then. Let's assume that we crack this nut, and we figure out how to code everything correctly. We should expect to see overall system efficiency improvements in that dispatch time, right?
For high priority calls.
Only for high priority calls.
High priority and critical. I think our focus is where we're at. Our focus right now is to improve what's coded for high priority and critical, and that we make adjustments to the system to make sure that we're getting to the critical and high priority calls.
Okay. I'm with you. Okay, so, and we do that, and presumably then response time comes down, which is what we want to see, and appropriately so. But here's the challenge I'm having. What we're hearing from CPSM is if we fill all the vacancies that we have right now, we would consider our police department to be adequately staffed. But if I'm understanding what you're saying right, that still puts me, the manager at Hobby Lobby, who's got a trespass that won't leave, with a potentially 30 to 45-minute wait. But knowing what we know about our community, people can have mental health crises, they can escalate, and even if I, the manager, call you back and say, okay, it was just someone who wouldn't leave, and now it's someone who wouldn't leave and is escalating and decompensating, that still doesn't make a police officer available to get out there faster. So how do we sort of, we can't be everywhere all the time, but we still have to deal with the fact that citizens expect a reasonable response time on things that are happening now, even when they don't meet what is objectively a reasonable criteria for a critical or high priority call. I'm struggling to reconcile the idea that we would be fully staffed and still not be able to get to a potentially volatile trespass situation in under 45 minutes.
Mayor, council members, Councilmember Rowan, you're right. okay?
That's my favorite answer. You can sit down.
Right. So if we could just unpack that just a little bit, because yes, we absolutely want to make sure that we're getting to those high priority, those critical calls. In the scenario that our system is working appropriately and coded correctly, if you call back, right, on a medium priority call or just a trespasser, but now they're wanting to fight somebody or it's becoming more volatile, that call should be recoded to a high priority call. So the idea would be is that we would always be going to the high priority calls before we ever send anybody to the medium priority calls. Does that also mean that you're likely going to see extended call times because now we've dropped off a lot of these what were coded high priority calls to be now medium level calls? You are going to see extended times. Business owners who are getting fairly rapid response times now because we're trying to get everywhere all at once for trespass calls, we're going to see possibly some extended call times. To the comment about overall staffing, when we get that staff, I think it got alluded to in one of the previous questions about bringing the CPSM back. One of my goals since being here, and this is not against the CPSM because they have been extremely valuable for us. One of my frustrations with this process was that we send them our data to then analyze it and tell us and interpret some of our own data. And I think one of the key things for our department to get to is that we're using the very same data that we gave CPSM on a regular basis as a metric to guide us where we are at, which will help guide some of the staffing stuff. And like I said before, I'm confident that we have the workload side of the math figured out. But the distribution and the deployment side are some conversations that we had earlier is to try to help figure out how they're doing the math from our data and where they're pulling things so we can start to use some of those metrics on our own on a more regular basis to include for staffing and more modern. That way we're not having to do this every 2, 3, 4 years and figure out what's going on. I think that at the very earliest, like with our dispatch stuff, we're going to be pulling 911 response times as we're making changes monthly. Once that stabilizes, then I can see us going quarterly, twice a year, just make sure. But we're at this moment where we've got to stabilize our data and information, and part of it is making sure that we are putting clean data into the system, and then that we know that we can use it as we go forward. And I think that's the biggest key takeaway for me out of this is that there's a lot of recommendations here, but the recommendations for our department to use our data and establish those metrics and those measurements, to be able to come to you and use those as assessments, because the conversation in several months may very well be when we've got good workload assessment, we've got good dispatch assessment. That leads us down the road to say, hey, maybe we have a problem with our call taking process. So the first step is we have to clean up the information going into it, and I think that's going to lead to more projects. So.
Yeah, Mayor, I'd like to ask one more question. Is it all right if I ask Captain Willie to respond first and then Captain Mayo? Is that okay with you?
Sure.
Okay, so I want to just talk about turnover a little bit. I noted in the report that the specialized units were not included in the scope of analysis. So help me understand from your perspective, what's driving turnover in patrol today? Is it people getting pulled into specialized units? Is it them getting pulled out of patrol into detective units? Is it just turnover? What do you see driving turnover, not overtime, but the turnover in our patrol units?
So quite simply, the turnover that we see, patrol feeds everything in the department. It feeds command staff, it feeds detectives, it feeds all specialized. You have to be a patrol officer before you do anything. And so every time we have a promotion, every time that there's a new specialized assignment, every time there's a retirement, it pulls from the bottom and it leaves a vacancy. Going forward, as of right now, we just have shift change. To make sure that we have minimum staffing levels in patrol, we are intentionally holding officers who have already been selected for specialized assignments to make sure that we have the minimum staffing for patrol. So I think one of the concepts that we're moving forward with is we have a minimum staffing for each shift, which is 9. And I think you guys have heard that number before. But looking at the numbers and the data, the idea is that, okay, well, do we have a minimum staffing for each shift? Because you've got vacation, you've got sick call, you've got training to get guys to. And so what we're trying to manage more is try not to go down below that minimum staffing and manage it before you fill to the rest of the department so that staffing shortages is almost shared through the rest of the department instead of only solely in patrol. But there's a counter effect with that too, right? Because people want to get promoted, people want to go to specialized assignments. So there's this balance that we're trying to work of is let's not let patrol bear the brunt of our staffing shortages, but let's make sure that we can fill some of these important specialized assignments.
Mayor, Councilmember Warren, I don't really have anything specific extra to add to that, but I want to emphasize a really good example of how that's been lately, and that is also through promotions and retirements. That has taken a huge shakeup of the department. Just in December alone, we had 4 retirements. Of those, 3 of them were in command, and then 2 of them were out of detectives. So every time those positions change, we have to have someone to come up to be the supervisory position, which now leaves the gap at the bottom. But if we take that out of the bottom to fill that new position in detectives, then we have that gap further perpetuated, right? It becomes very cyclical, and it just takes a long time. One of the challenges there is that just because we now on paper show that we just hired 4 more, if we just go ahead and grab 4 out of patrol and throw them up into those new spots, say detectives or wherever else, which I would love being the new detective commander, don't get me wrong, and so would my other detectives, right? The problem is, just because we have those people on paper, they're not in the seat. They're not actively patrolling. They still have to go through another approximately 6 to 9 months worth of backgrounds, hiring, training, everything else before they're in the car doing the job. So that's where the balance comes in as to when we start pulling those extra people out and putting them upstairs or wherever we put them, because do we have this replacement body, for lack of a better term, fully trained and ready to step into the position as a full-time, full-fledged patrol officer that can run the gamut and do the work.
Then can you just clarify something you said during your presentation? When you talked about supporting the idea of a CSI unit, do you support it being civilian or do you want it to be sworn officers?
Civilian.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
Very good. Thank you, Councilmember Neese.
Thank you, Mayor. Just some questions here for the folks on CPSF. You talked to, Councilmember Rumsfeld talked about this rule of 60 and stuff, which helps determine what the patrol levels is, which is great. And you brought up the detectives, but I mean, how does the city know how many detectives? How do you base how many detectives are needed by the city? The city can utilize.
Yeah, there's not a standard.
Not a caseload or anything like that.
Well, there are different assessments of how many. One group says that 300 Part 1 offenses requires 1 detective. Another says that a detective should be handling 120 to 180 cases a year. There's another study that says they should, 1 detective should handle no more than 100 cases. The challenge is that in many agencies vary in terms of practice. So in some agencies, every case goes to a detective. In most agencies, many cases are handled by patrol to their conclusion and submitted to the prosecutor. So there's really not a standard rule. When you're way outside of those numbers, if a detective's handling 500 or 600 cases, then you know there's a problem. And conversely, if they're handling 40, you know there's a problem as well. But there's not an absolute number in terms of the standard. IACP standard is, International Association of Chiefs of Police standard is 120 to 180 cases per detective. And of course, if you're a violent crime detective, a homicide could take months, if not years, to investigate, where a theft detective could handle 50 cases a month. It's just a matter of processing paperwork. So there's not a hard and fast number.
But it would be a number that the department can utilize to try to benchmark so that they can say, hey, listen, council, we need X number more detectives because our caseload, just like we do with our city attorneys, when the caseload gets too much, we need additional city attorneys. So that's something they can benchmark as well. Because as Officer Woosley said, we'd like to do this a lot as in-house to make sure they maintain their own department. We don't have to bring consultants in every actually every 4 years would be fine, but every 2 years or every year they could be doing this themselves to make sure that we're adjusting staff appropriately. So the next time we bring you in, you say, hey, look at it, they're running great. But thank you. I do have a question now for Officer please.
Captain Woolley?
So I just want to clarify this because I have heard a lot of constituents complain of the long wait times for an officer to come out. And often there's like, you might as well call back tomorrow or something like that in a lot of cases. So my concern is, you mentioned that I'm a little confused on the clarity as far as when you started this priority calling, because I know the fire department the last time they turned it on and their priority calling, they gave us a report, their numbers have come down, they were looking good. Are you saying that you weren't part of what the fire department was doing in their priority calling? Or you were part of that? I didn't quite get that unless you just start it like 4 weeks ago? What was the timing when you started this change of your priorities?
Yeah. Mayor, Council, Councilmember Neese. So the fire department went through the priority dispatch at about the same time. One of the things that they did that we didn't do initially was, we both started into the system kind of organically and then mapped those calls. They very early on had quite a few challenges from my understanding, and they weren't happy with the new protocol system that we both had implemented that were very similar from each side of the house. That resulted in them doing a very similar thing that we are doing on our side of the house is they went through every single call type and recoded it exactly how they wanted it prioritized, and that's where it smoothed out. So Derek was the prior 911 manager before that, and these were conversations that Derek and I were having prior to his departure. Was we were seeing the symptoms of the problem with the new dispatch system, and that likely our solution was to have to go through and fix all of those coding determinants. So the fire department initially did have very similar problems on a lower scale than us, but they had to go through the heavy lift of recategorizing and refiltering all their stuff. And that's where we're at now, but we just have a pretty significant number of more protocols and or call types to go through, and a lot wider spectrum of work than the fire department does. So our lift is a little bit heavier than what the fire department had to go through, but not unique to.
So you discovered it pretty much the same time, it's just that you haven't had a chance to get to it and until now CPSM is now you're working a little harder. Okay.
Great.
And then, let's see. Well, I guess that's all I had because that's my 2 questions. So thank you very much.
Very good. Thank you, Councilmember Gillick.
My questions have been addressed.
Very good. Councilmember Shaw.
Same.
Very good. So, Councilmember Shaw, if you want to come back this way on the topic, if you've got any questions dealing with the kind of administrative part, dealing with records and IT.
I just have an overtime question, so.
We'll get to that
Yeah.
one. All right, very good. Councilmember Kulik on that second category. Councilmember Neese, records, IT issues.
No.
Councilmember Owen?
I do. I just don't know who wants to answer them. So I'd like to just start with, and feel free, whoever wants to do. Records, data, whoever loves it. So, I guess my first question is, what's the deal with all the numbers being different? What's in CPSM? Does it match what's on the chief's report? Does it match what Councilmember Neese pulled in the FBI? I understand there's definitional discrepancies, but there shouldn't be. What needs to happen for us to get to a consistent set of data where when we say violent crime, we all mean the exact same thing and those numbers all line up?
Yes, Mayor, Councilmember Owen. That's a good question because we deal with the same differences in the numbers. Just to kind of maybe clarify, like an example, when you look at when they had the homicide numbers up there for the last couple of years, the FBI numbers were considerably lower than what we actually had reported in the community. Some of those are due to like justifiable homicide, officer-involved shootings, or like baby deaths, right, that are investigated as homicides for like SIDS and or negligence on those behalfs. So some of that stuff is like justifiable that the FBI doesn't acknowledge is not part of their reporting criteria. So that's some of the difference. When you look at the consistency of the numbers as far as the calls for service, and it depends on where we're pulling it. You got records from CAD. You have incident records, which is essentially where the first 911 call comes in and what it's coded as. And then you have the case records. So we may very well be dispatched to, let's say it's arbitrary number, 100 robberies in a year. But when the officers show up on those calls, it's actually not a robbery. It was just a theft, but it got coded as a robbery to begin with. And then the officers will write up a theft instead of a robbery. So your incident information will show you that you have this many robberies. Your case reports will show you that you only have this many robberies. So it has to, depends on where you're pulling that information and what time and space was it being recorded into the system.
That is a super unsatisfactory answer. So I get what you're saying, that seems very true, but how do we as policymakers wrestle with that then, so that when we're making decisions or debating issues, we're acting off a consistent set of data? Is it in better definitions for, council presentations? How do we wrestle with this? And please count this as a follow-up, Mayor, because I have a second question.
Sure.
So my answer to that would be is that, to my comment before about us not using our data appropriately before, then we didn't look at 911 response times, we didn't look at that. When we develop these metrics, and so one of the things that we're looking at when we look at workload, okay, what exactly numbers are we going to look at and where are they coming from? That'll improve the consistency of it. And so I think going forward with these metrics that we're talking about, the data specifically towards workload, calls for service, 911 times, is that we standardize these reports of where they're coming from to improve that. As far as the discrepancies between what the feds report and what we report to them, we report everything to the state filters it, then it gets filtered yet again at the feds, and so I don't have seriously a good answer for you for that.
That's fine. So, but let's, now for my second question, let's kind of pull on this thread of what you're talking about, which I think is really going from just data to actual information. How do we take the numbers and make them usable? And so what I've heard today is that if we fill the 4 records position, we consider ourselves staffed there, and that's probably true. But what do you need in terms of actually getting to taking that data and putting it into use, in terms of personnel, systems, whatever, so that we are doing, criminology type work, so that we're doing projection type work, so that we're actually developing theories of crime fighting and strategies and actually really taking all the numbers and using them. I've raised this question now for a couple of years about doing more risk analysis around property crimes and connecting SEPTED to how we're policing. And it just doesn't seem like we have the capacity. We can generate data, but translating that into strategies and tactics seems like it might need either technology or personnel or something to that effect. What are your thoughts?
So if I could wave the magic wand, is I think what you're asking me, is that, so currently right now, we don't have any crime analysts, or that spot is vacant. We just recently opened it and we created it as an analyst 2 to try to get some better qualified candidates. In a perfect world, I would, for the data that you're asking for, I would like to see the department have 2 very qualified data analysts. One who focuses on the crime, the strategies, the issues outward bound, right? Neighborhoods, trends, those types of things, right? And then I would like the second one to look inward. That way we're looking at payroll reports for overtime, that kind of stuff. So 2 of them to be able to look both in different directions, because how we function inside the organization is obviously going to affect our resources and our capability to handle some of those crime strategies that you're talking about. And largely comes with that is this goes back to your comment about the culture, Councilman Rebels, is that we've never really looked at our data this way before, especially with some. And we've always pulled some data, but we've never gotten to the point where we've been really involved in creating strategies based off of real-time information to a really in-depth level. And I think that's a culture change throughout the department that needs to take place. Comes with those analysts, but it also comes with the command level staff and the officers to understand that information is valuable. And then the most important part is from those analyst pieces is that data and that information consumable? Is there a good product behind it? The last several months of working with dispatch times and other things with the CPSM, looking at spreadsheet over spreadsheet, I get the data as I look at it in spreadsheet form, but to hand it to anybody else who doesn't know that, the end product for that is super important.
Okay, Captain Mayor, you want to address this issue?
If I could add something to that real quick.
Please.
I like the question because specifically I had tasked our crime analyst with that type of a problem about a year and a half ago. And she spent a considerable amount of time trying to dig through our records management system in order to find those hot spots with those hot suspects from those areas where the vehicles are ditched and where they most likely to run, where they live, and put together that real-time crime analyst style of answer and work. And what really ran us headlong into the wall is our records management system is not up to doing that type of work. In order to pull that type of data from the system, it would have required us to find just the report and then go read every one of those reports to see who the suspect was and then where he ditched said vehicle and where he lives from there, where he picked it up. And so it was just not capable of our system to pull that data in that type of needed detail to bring those pictures into focus.
So just to follow up then, because the idea of a software conversion kind of makes me sick to my stomach. Are we talking a new piece of technology, or do we have to upend the whole system that you have to get to where you're going? Because I think where you're going is where I'd like to go.
So that's
Sorry,
we've had
Mayor.
multiple conversations with different software companies about our dreams for what we would like to be able to do to it, and some of them have said yes, we can do those types of things. The system we have right now just isn't capable.
So to elaborate on that, we will have to have the conversation at some point. So the records management software we're using now is roughly 15 years old. And so whether we want to make a software change in the future or not, it's coming. And I think what's important for us in the department side, the conversations we're having is whatever software we go to or what we continue with is just we need it to have specific capabilities. And that's why this process is very valuable to me, is because as we're going through this, we're identifying the shortfalls of our current system and what we want when we start looking for a new system.
And when you talk about the system, you're talking about LERMS, right?
Yep, LERMS.
And LERMS connects to full court, right?
That I'm not certain of. I don't know that.
Gina, does it?
I'm sorry,
Does LERMS connect to full court or not?
it does not.
It does not. Okay.
So when we're talking RMS systems, that's a whole nother probably work session, I believe, of wormholes and yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, very good. Thank you very much. I don't have any questions because we just talked about where I wanted to go, which is the importance of the big picture and collecting this data and processing it. So it has to be a high priority going forward. I'm sure we would all agree with that. Councilmember Tidswell, Councilmember Boyette.
Everybody is short of employees, but you got 4 clerical, I think, right now. Must say you can't fill them. How are you gonna go forward with this, because there's not enough maybe work staff, maybe they don't, the pay is wrong. How do we outsource? How do we get past this negative part of the system? Or do we?
So yes, lots of challenges. I think some of the recommendations that CPSM has made about utilizing our volunteer and some of our retirees as maybe temporary employees, I think is a valuable recommendation that we need to explore if we can't fill those. And I think even if we can't fill those, I think that we should be in a space where we're always looking to see where our volunteers can relieve some of the workload. And so if I can't fill those 4 spots right away, we definitely have to go with what we can control, and that's where we have to start looking at our efficiency of the system, the software, their workload, and how we can pull some of that workload off.
You're good, Councilor Rupsis?
Yeah, you referenced a second data analyst. But if I recall correctly, a second data analyst was part of the big push that was just included in the last budget. So is that on the way or not?
Chief, are you working?
This first one's gone anyway, isn't it?
Well, you still get the second.
Yeah, but you can't fill it.
Council member, that position is already on board. It's up in detectives.
So the second data analyst is not doing
No, I forgot what
crime data analyst?
what is the exact title up there?
It's a technology forensic cell phone.
Forensic, yes.
That's a position.
So not to be confused with a crime analyst, we have a forensic analyst upstairs doing phones, electronic type stuff. That's the one position that we hired.
Thank you.
Okay, very good. Let's go on to the final topic, and we'll open up for public comment, but overtime, Councilmember Shaw's been patiently waiting, and we don't want anybody to steal her questions, so let's start back with Councilmember Shaw.
Yes, nobody can steal my question. I'm not sure who can answer this, maybe the chief. Can you help me understand the structure that you're thinking of in terms of pushing down the decision-making on overtime and the budgeting overview? What level is that going to? How many people is that going to affect? I'd like a kind of a better understanding of that.
Yeah, certainly. So as I indicated, we were pretty centralized on how we were handling our budget. So what we're talking about doing is pushing it down several levels. So obviously, the assistant chief is in the middle of all that. Now we're pushing it down to the division captains. So there's 3 of those, to the lieutenants. So you have lieutenants in patrol and detectives in evidence. And then depending on assignments, if somebody is overseeing a specialized unit, for example, it might be a sergeant. Our drug unit is supervised by a sergeant, so they'll be tasked paying attention to their overtime expenditure. So what we're doing is pushing the knowledge, the education, the accountability to the respective supervisors, which spreads it out, gives us a little bit more control and accountability on who's doing what, rather than somebody 3 levels up trying to approve your timesheet, and I'm not quite sure whether you worked or not, and that's some of the problems that we ran into with that.
That makes sense to me. I guess I'm kind of curious about the accountability structure for that, in the sense of are each of these people going to have a budget for overtime that they have to work within, or how are you kind of going to handle that? Is it just going to all be one lump sum that you're in charge of making sure no one department goes over?
Yeah, and that's some of the discussions that we're having with Andy and finance right now is getting some of those, CPSM refers to them as, what do you call them, silos or something like that, a bucket, rather than one great big umbrella of an operations budget. And so the people that are in charge of the SWAT team, for example, are going to be responsible for making sure that they're staying within their O&M, their training budget as well. When I talk about the captains here, they're responsible overall for their division. So Captain Woolley is in charge of operations. I expect him to be paying attention to the overtime expenditures of anything that's in a uniform. Same thing for detectives. On a smaller scale, our internal affairs captain, is with training and administration. So much smaller, fewer people to be paying attention to. So that's the theory, is that we basically have given authority, and demanding accountability, and then understanding what it is that, what the issue is that, we're spending overtime money that we don't need to, so let's get a handle on it. Talking with Andy's staff a month or so ago, we've already implemented some of these, and it was a noticeable improvement. Just being able to, make sure that we're applying the pays properly, that we're, not double paying or paying somebody that shouldn't have been, was on vacation, but they got paid for a holiday, for example. Those are errors that we're looking to correct.
One follow-up, and I'm done. So will council get information that broken down like that, so we'll be able to see, like, the detective division is way over its overtime budget, but SWAT isn't? Is that going to be kind of the metrics that we can expect back from some of that information?
We certainly can do that if you like. You've seen the budget; it can be as itemized as you like. We generally just have general operations and detectives and all that. Again, bottom line for me when I report is that we may have to shift money from accounts, but we've not ever gone over our budget. But that's not a process that you want to hear. You want to make sure that, you know, everything's being good here. We don't need to move money or whatnot. But I mean, it's important we don't blow the budget, but also the process. So we can certainly do that, and that's conversations we're in with Andy's staff on what that looks like. I mean, you know what the budget. I mean, it's this column after column after column of stuff, and so I'm trying to simplify that, train our people, make sure we know what we're doing, holding people accountable for it, and
Yeah,
then reporting
seems
that number.
like an easier way for council to understand those $3 million in overtime, where exactly is it going? I think all of that will be beneficial in the future, so.
And again, I mean, what's complicated is when you start looking at our contract and a lot of the things that require overtime pay. I mean, there's a lot of those things. Those were negotiated for, and you know, so those are contractual things that we need to look at. We have big calls, we have big recs, we have, you know, dignitary visits. We don't have any of those, but those are things that significantly impact your overtime budget. And then, as Wayne indicated, we do a lot of work outside of the police department, and we pay the officers up front and then expect reimbursement. And that takes a little bit of time if we ever get it. There are some people out there that have yet to pay, and that reflects in an overage in our overtime budget.
Okay, very good, thank you.
Things that we'd like to report to you.
Is that final?
That's so funny, you got a minute left.
North Dakota, 35. Bobcats, 32.
Minute 4 left.
A minute 4 left. Not that that allows us to watch it today, but Councilmember Tisdale will be our eyes and ears. Councilmember Gillick, Councilmember Neese, on this overtime issue is where we are.
Overtime issue. No, I will say this, I think it's a great tool that you guys are doing. As a council, I don't see, you know, we're just gonna know if you're over budget or not. Maybe in operations, the budget committee, you present what's going on that, but I don't think as a whole council, the detailed reporting has to be stuff like that. I'm sorry, I'm gonna go back to data because this is something I see Danny over there. We talked about this in council, you know, 4 years ago, how the data in the police department was hard to get. I remember, Chief, I asked you for a report on some handguns, and it was, you know, 2 officers, 2 weeks. I think it's growing, but it's, you know, it was a long time to get the data because they had to read all the reports. We've known about this problem for a long time. It's got to get changed, and you know, if the CPSM report can say, I remember reading something about Tyler Technologies in the report, and I didn't get a chance to see if that was going to be the solution or not. But do you mind if I go back to them to ask them?
Go ahead.
That is a possible solution to get Tyler Technologies, whatever they are, to get this resolved, where we can actually get this data in the system, or should we can Tyler Technologies and look for a completely different vendor?
A couple parts to that. One being in the CPSM report, one of the things that they recommended is to go back to Tyler Tech and get some more training to utilize the system to its full capabilities, which we aren't as of this time. But even when we do get to the point where we're using the system with full capabilities, there's going to be limitations to it. As far as just canning Tyler Tech, the generation of software that we're on with the LERMs, they have a new version of Enterprise, which is different platform-based, that kind of stuff, different capabilities. So to my comment before, software changes in our future no matter what because we're on an older legacy system that they're using.
They're going to change this.
They've got to change it anyway. So back to our intention is as we looked for new software, it's these types of data points that we're looking for being very automated. On the flip side of that, because we just did an update with NIBR's information into our reports where officers are trying to input some federal reporting requirements, that all of this data that we're looking to pull out of a system has to be put in by somebody, and it has to, when we do it, it has to follow the good data in to get good data out from the get-go, and making sure who does that, and are we adding the burden on the officers, or is it who's going to be putting some of that data and capturing it? So that's all part of the conversation, but we're headed down that road for new software either way.
Yeah, I know it's going to be, the sooner we get that good data in, the sooner we can get better reports in the future. Yep. But could I talk to the CPSM people about that? Because, I mean, I'm familiar with the healthcare industry is everyone loves Cerner, or everyone hates Cerner. I mean, it depends on which hospital you're at, who you work, what you're used to. What have you seen in the field as far as the police department being able to get good data out of reports where it doesn't take 2 officers 2 weeks to get data?
I can echo the same comment you've heard. Pretty much every place we've been around the country, they hate the system. That there are problems. The biggest challenge that we've seen is where we've implemented record management software technology, rather than saving time and making things easier and accessible, it's actually complicated it. And now, for just as an example, they take a report. Now there's an evidence piece to it. Rather than automatically transferring the information, you have to re-enter everything all over again. If it goes for investigations, they have to re-enter it all over again. If there's evidence, they have to put it. And so rather than generating 1 report, they might be generating 10 reports. Where we've seen it successful is communities have actually hired the technicians or technical people from the software company as a county and said, okay, make this work. And they've actually been able to do it. But what we saw probably starting just before the pandemic, a lot of the software and RMS systems and everything else were all getting bought up. And it has not improved the outcome. I can tell you that from across the country. And so the ones that have kind of succeeded is they went to the company and said, hey, would you like a job with us? We'll match your salary. And they've actually hired their people away and made the system work. But it's a common thing we're seeing across the country. And it spills over into fire and all of the other areas. That as we request this information, it becomes more cumbersome. And I was explaining to the department, I was just in Ohio in a department, because of state law changes, federal law changes, their clerical people, I went in the morning and she rolls out this paper, a green paper of Excel spreadsheet, and she's manually filling everything in from the weekend. And I said, wait a minute, isn't that why we have technology and are generating all these reports? And she said, the problem is I can't get them out. So I just look at it and I have to go through and manually fill out the spreadsheet to send to the state. And I said, well, do you get anything back? And she said, no, but I have to fill it out because it's so long. So that's the problem we're seeing across the country, which impacts their productivity, because now they're spending time on all of these other areas. Officers are spending an inordinate amount of time just to produce the report that's required. And so it is a challenge across every place we go. And then you throw in the whole, what we're seeing now is the introduction of artificial intelligence, AI. It has some promise to help, but it also has some other new issues that it creates.
So you're not seeing successes anywhere unless they hire an IT guy from the company to come in.
Well, or they have their IT staff takes the training and is able to work the programs, because a lot of the companies will say this module will work, your module will work with their module, and they don't. There's always a glitch, and then their answer is, well, we just sell the program. You must have done something wrong. And so that's why your IT staff becomes critical, and why the recommendation, because everything we're doing pretty much in all of our emergency services is technology based. Your body worn cameras, your car computer, the radios, everything seems to be going that direction. So they're as critical sometimes as a lot of other functions.
So your IT recommendation would be more about training officers as opposed to fixing things.
Right. Well, if they go take all the training, a lot of times they're able to adjust your system, but it takes sometimes a full-time person just to keep up on all of the errors. And we've been in departments that bought the ticket modules because that was going to save time on the prosecutorial and court end, and they ended up taking them out because the officer said it actually took longer and was more error prone than if they just wrote it out. Which to me, as a former manager and a chief, I'm thinking you just paid $100,000 for this software that doesn't work, and it became so cumbersome that people just stopped using it.
Thank you.
So it is a problem. I wished I could say I have an example. I used to in the fire end, but they got bought out, and now I'm hearing the same complaints on that end. So it's pretty much unique across all of those areas.
Thank you.
Okay, very good, thank you. Council will have to try to wrap up here. We're now 2 hours into this very important report, but we do have 2 other items on our agenda. Piece of bad news, final score, North Dakota 35, Bobcats 32, slugfest, job well done, but not this year. At least we have the Chris Kukulski is in his Lions blue, still celebrating the Lions victory. So we'll give you that. Councilor Rowan.
Thanks, Mayor.
Overtime.
Chief. So I think we can all appreciate that if direct supervisors have more budget awareness and budget training, that's likely to get better controls over overtime. But something still isn't quite adding up for me. And so I can't believe that's the only issue driving overtime, because if I look at the data that's in the report, and from your data as well, we're saying crime is down, we're saying calls for service are down, we've added police officers, but overtime is up. And that's not jiving for me, that's not making sense how that could be. So talk about that a little, and then I think I'm gonna have a follow-up for you. What else is contributing here?
Well, let's just look very simply at, again, although we are at what, 160 on payroll or whatnot, we don't have all those officers in the seats. And so when we end up in the minimum staffing situation or short, then we end up having to pay overtime to backfill. So you have some of those situations, where you have that taking place. If you have a big call, if you have officers that are working late, a fatality accident, when you're calling out officers and having them work long protracted hours, those are all at an overtime rate. Some of the other things I referred to in the contract situation, for example, short shift changeover. If there's not a full shift in between the shift that you just finished and the one that you're coming on, that's 4 hours overtime. So you have these things that are built in the contract, which also contribute to the overtime thing. And again, things that we can talk about during contract time. So you have some of those things. Some of our specialized units, so we don't deplete the on-duty personnel, train on their day off. And when they train on their day off, then that is at an overtime rate. Sometimes it's in lieu. We try not to do that too much because we end up in the same situation.
Chief, I don't mean to interrupt you. I just know the mayor wants us to move on. So I've heard you say what it could be. What I'm asking you is, what is it? Do we know? Is it more specialized units? Is it more severe accidents? Like, do we actually know what's driving it besides just lack of budget controls?
I think that right now what's driving it is that we have the reimbursables that are not reimbursed yet. The number that was up there was 115% over budget. Talking to Andy today, that particular line item had 32% left in it, but we were waiting for $250,000 or something like that to come back in. So that's part of it. And then just the regular overtime, we do have some things in general is to answer your question.
Okay.
And that was one of the things I said. We need to drill down further and identify clearly what's driving the overtime.
And so part of the solution will be almost a coding solution, right? We will be able to understand what's overtime because I'm on a call, what's overtime because of paperwork, or overtime because of training, which we don't know right now. Is that correct?
Well, it's in big umbrellas. So we want to be able to refine that a little bit.
And then my last question, Chief, is this is the first time I've heard this idea of contractually negotiated overtime. Do you, or does Andy, or could you get a projection or estimate of the, $2.9 million now for a couple fiscal years in a row, how much of that is actually contractually obligated? Things that we would have to pay no matter what, versus things that happen because of, calls or whatever. Are we able to?
Which is contractual as well, but yeah, we should be able to pull that out.
I would be interested in having that data, thank you.
Very good, thank you. I've got a question for either Wayne or Tom, and whoever's on, wants to address this. Very much appreciated your attention to our collective bargaining agreement. It was kind of beyond the scope, but it still impacts the overtime analysis. So that was very educational for me. As you can imagine, those agreements are a product of many years. We don't want to kick that hornet's nest unnecessarily. If the system's working, we don't want to fight over nickels. But the timing is very appropriate. We're going to go into these discussions. Can you help us maybe just prioritize 2 or 3 areas in our agreement that are worth having a discussion, because they are 2 things. One, they're true cost centers. I mean, they're significant. They're not nickels and dimes. And then second, that they are contrary to what is typical in the industry, and hence worth having a discussion about. You heard reference to the short shift issues. We've seen the report about pretty liberal limits on taking comp time that then gets converted potentially later to cash, those sorts of issues. But anything else?
Well, I think that's a major, excuse me, a major issue is the comp time. You have, in effect, an unlimited cash out of comp time. And when I said earlier that I had looked at a report, a payroll record from the finance department on all expenses, it had 67,000 line items. So I took the first 3 city ID numbers. I don't know who the personnel were. And I looked at their records for the year. One of those employees had 560 hours of comp time cashed out. One had about 460, and one had about 410. So it's a very liberal program. Most agencies limit the comp time and limit the opportunity to cash it out. And when you bank comp time, if you get promoted or there's a pay step increase or an annual cost of living increase, you earn it at one rate and you pay it out at another. And so conceivably, you could earn it and get it paid out at 10% higher than you earned it if you had a annual step increase and a promotion there. It could be upwards of 10%. But most agencies, there are agencies, and the interesting thing about police departments, there was a question about consistency across all agencies. There is no consistency in this issue. I did a study a few months ago. That agency requires all comp time to be used as comp time. None of it can be paid out. Most agencies limit the amount of cash out opportunities to 2 or even 1 a year, where here you can cash out your comp time 26 times a year at every pay period. And so that just kind of lends itself, and when you look at comp time builds on itself, because if I take comp time as a police officer, and I think I alluded to that in this report, if I take comp time at 10 hours of work, comp time, that's 15 hours. So now I get a day and a half off. If they have to backfill behind me, they're backfilling at 15 hours times time and a half, and it just keeps compounding in that way, and it becomes very expensive. So that would be one area, and then again, the idea behind the management of it is that when supervisors are making decisions authorizing comp time, and they have no idea what the budget is. It's kind of like I have checks. I don't know what the account balance is, but I still can write checks. And so pushing down this accountability, as the chief described it, will go a long way, and I think he's already indicated it has already had an impact on reducing the overtime. So the comp time is a huge issue. Accountability is a huge issue. The short shift pay, as the chief talked about, in effect, people are being paid 4 hours of overtime or 6 hours at straight time for hours not worked. So that's a pretty big windfall. That is extraordinarily an exception in the industry. I've not seen that in any of the studies that we've done, where the system is built to allow people to be paid for hours not worked. It just doesn't happen. But it's part of your collective bargaining agreement. So the department is forced to comply with that. So those are probably the areas that I think.
Okay, very good. Thank you very much. Councilor Tidswell, Councilor Boyette, Councilor Ripsis. So nothing. We'll open up for public comment on the CPSM study. Is there anybody with us tonight who would like to comment? Councilor or former Council Member Tariki, welcome back.
Thank you. I'll just make a couple of really quick comments. What you were saying about the data systems and what's going on right now has been happening across industries for decades. This is not anything new, and it's been a constant challenge. When I was at Verizon, that was one of the things that they did regularly was to hire somebody to come in and to help them keep track. And in fact, some of the contracts required that they had an employee on staff, literally in our building, in order to help us deal with that stuff. The other thing I want to say, and this is a recommendation to you, Council, what we do, look at what happened with the Energy Commission. That worked really well because we got people who were local experts on board to help the city department to figure out what to do. We need to do this with our data systems. We need to get a data system council, whatever you want to call it, especially, and this is a very good place to start, the data systems that the police have that's in there. But it is a very, everything is complicated these days. Everything requires experts to be involved and do stuff. And without having that expertise on staff, we can't keep up and do these things. One of the things I learned implementing software systems actually it was at Verizon again, was that you had to have a good software system, but you had to have the people on board as well. And it takes a lot of time and energy to do all that stuff. You can have the best data system in the world, but if you don't train them on how to do it, it doesn't get used. And frankly, that's something we're missing across the board everywhere right now. Nobody is really training anybody to use computer systems anymore. We're just assuming that people know how to do it. And especially when you get into a system that is as detail-oriented and as data-oriented as what we're talking about here with our police department, it is really critical to have some really good people on board leading that. But I do think that the best place to start with that is to create a commission, a committee, whatever you want to call it. We have a number of really good people here in Billings that understand how this stuff is being used in the business world, and it will apply right over to what they're trying to do once you figure out what the culture and organizational things are. But at least, it can give us a good idea of what direction it can go in and help bring people's experiences with these things to help prevent you guys from making some of those same mistakes.
Very good, thank you. Any other public comment on item number 2? I don't see anybody moving toward the podium, so we'll close the public comment period. Thank all of our presenters. Great presentation, great report, learned a lot. Chief St. John, if you can get this all wrapped up in what, 10 days, something like that? Okay, that would be great. To be continued, but very educational. Thank you very much. Council, are you still good without taking a break?
Yeah, we're fine.
Okay, we'll move on then to item number 3. Wyeth, Tina, appreciate your patience. I think you can understand just how important that last item was. So item number 3, which is our code enforcement ordinance amendment review. There's actually 4 items in our packet. The 4th item that's not on the agenda is the kind of related. It's the creation of the graffiti fund. So we'll kind of morph into that as well. So Tina Hoger, our code enforcement manager, it's all yours.
Okay, so good evening. I'll try to make this very quick since we've been here a long time. Presenting to you tonight about 5 different bullet points. Mayor, do you want to go through them all and wait for the end for questions, or do you want to do them one at a time?
Let's go through them all. I think they're fairly straightforward and they're often related. So go ahead.
What I sent you in the packet is pretty crystal clear. My PowerPoint will, it goes straight across all the red lines. So you should have the red line version, and the PowerPoint will basically drill into the changes that I'm requesting. So those are the ones we're going to be talking about tonight. And again, it's just some minor language revisions in here, nothing too major. First one is going to be our code for parking for camping purposes. In discussion with the police department, we had found that we didn't have a way to address non-motorized vehicles. So I'm asking to add that language into the ordinance. And then authorized tourist park is kind of an outdated term, so we have opted to replace it with the state code definition of a campground. Everything else stays the same. It helps to tighten some of the existing prohibitions that we have, fills in that gap of, you know, if PD comes across a non-motorized vehicle now, they can address it. We don't have to go and utilize a different code, you know, for a parking violation. So that's basically, Todd, are you with me online?
Yes, I am.
Okay, so you can jump in anytime when I forget something. I did review this with the police department, as well as the parking division, so they were in approval of these changes. The next one is for graffiti rewards and reimbursements. Just some language tweak here to change the word accept to approve. Our intent was to have the city administrator approve these at the end and not have to bring them to council. If that is still acceptable to council, that's the way we will do it. We just needed to tweak the language a little bit. I included in your presentation a copy of the report form. You'll see that there's a progression. It goes, you know, police report, it goes to me, I investigate to make sure that all of the information is accurate. It then goes to the city administrator for approval, and then to the clerk for payment. So really no need to bring it before council unless you absolutely want it to be that way, but I think it's not really necessary. It's a reward system. I did have all the other language stays in the code the same way, so we're not making any changes to the graffiti ordinance as it is, other than just for the rewards section. So that would apply to 181105. It would apply to the resolution. We would have to tweak the language in there, and then of course we would update the submission form. So, and I wanted you guys to have a copy of that just so you can see what it looks like. In addition to that, I talked to Victoria Hill, and we plan on kind of doing some public outreach as far as this reward system, letting people know now that we do finally have a form in place, that it is available and that there is a system out there where people can take advantage of rewards for reporting graffiti. The next one is, Todd, you're up on this one. It's a basic language revision for municipal infractions. I had to make a change at the top here. Pointer is, this in your original packet was an A sub 3. I modified it to B sub 3 because that was just a typo. But everything else in this slide is the same. So Todd, go ahead and take it away.
That's fine. Thanks, Tina. This is just simply a housekeeping amendment.
Hey, Todd, I apologize for interrupting. I just wonder if you can speak up, or we can turn up the volume a little bit. It's just a little light. So speak forcefully, please. Go ahead.
Yeah, let me try this differently. Can you hear me better now?
A little bit.
Okay. I was noticing a little that Tina was cutting out a little bit too. I don't know what's happening with the connection here, but anyway, this is just simply a housekeeping amendment. the rule that 1302 references for service by publication has been basically repealed or done away with. It's been changed to Rule 4040 of the Montana rules. And so it's just simply updating the code to reflect what the current trail rules say. And that's all there is to that.
So basically a necessary change. So the next one is display of address numbers. So typically this was a misdemeanor violation. We thought that it would be better served as a municipal infraction. It speeds up the enforcement. It just makes it a simpler, more streamlined way of doing things. It doesn't need to be a misdemeanor. We also are removing the language of 20 days because it doesn't fit with our current processes that we put in place under the nuisance code. There's a first letter, there's a second and final, and then we move to citation. And so we're trying to bring these ordinances to where we're all consistent. And that's what we're reaching for when we're doing these minor ordinance updates. This was reviewed by the building official and she was good with it. The next one is has to do with the finance division and business licenses. Again, amending the language to change it from a misdemeanor to a municipal infraction. It just makes it easier for code enforcement to enforce. It doesn't tie up a lot of legal time. Procedurally, it's just better. And also, we wanted to add the language that each day the violation occurs is a separate offense because that's something that we could fine for if they absolutely refuse. It gives us another tool, and it is consistent with how we updated the nuisance code. Everything else stays the same. And again, Andy looked at this and was fine with it. That is the end. Any questions?
Very good, thank you. Questions for Tina or Todd? Councilmember Boyette.
How much is the reward?
$500 or a version thereof. It could be complete all of it or it could be a portion of it. Yes.
Will you be making sure you come back and increasing the reward over the years, because $500 in 10 years isn't going to be very much, right? So
if I'm here in 10 years. No, absolutely. We started at 500 because there were some agencies across the country that were lower. There were some that were higher, so we started in the middle, and obviously, yeah, we're gonna watch those trends.
okay, that's good to know, because otherwise we just.
And a lot of times people don't want to report, even if you dangle some money out there. So,
Tina, on the you mentioned your conversation with Victoria, which is great, but the people who will make these reports are often connected themselves, and they're not necessarily reading The Economist or the Billings Gazette. So I'm wondering a little bit about signage, which will get vandalized, I'll guarantee you, in high-risk areas to advertise the reward. I just encourage you to think about that as one way to get the word out. And then put a camera on that sign, because that will be the top target for future graffiti artists, I guarantee
check
you.
with Todd about putting cameras up.
And in a billboard. I'm not worried about it being vandalized, you can clean that off, but it will happen. Other questions?
Can I just make a comment?
Councilmember Boyette, of course.
In the summer, we've had a lot of, in Ward 5, we've had a lot of campers and whatnot, and we call, they get it done. I want to thank you.
Yay.
You do a good job.
We've sort of passed that torch off to the police department now too. So they've worked in partnership with us as far as dealing with the people, and we deal with the campers. So I mean, it's been a good partnership. So we have a good relationship there. My staff has worked hard on that. So if you are all good with these suggestions, I can bring this back to you for first read, probably on the 27th.
Great. I'm only seeing thumbs up. Any other comments, questions, anything?
Wonderful. I'm
Right.
glad that everybody else wore you down.
Tina, what about, we also had a copy of item 4, which was the actual ordinance for the creation of the graffiti fund. Anything on that you wanted to tell us about, or?
Just the language change from accept to approve, so that the city administrator can do that approval.
Okay,
So
we'll
that
look
would
for
be
that,
on
that'll
the-
come back at the same
That would
time.
be on the ordinance, it would update the resolution, and then I can make the board form itself accurate.
Okay, very good. No other questions?
And that's gonna still be on all, any bill paid anyway, right? Won't it
that?
show up on our weekly bill pays anyway that we see? That we approve?
I don't know, cause we haven't done one yet, so.
But, I mean, when you write a check to someone, you're
Yeah.
going to see it on.
Yeah.
Okay, so it'll go through the system
Oh,
anyway.
Andy's shaking his head no, so I don't know.
Well, you have a $1,500 limit
Oh,
that was set by council, so you won't see these.
Oh, we won't see that.
But I anticipated a question similar to that, surprisingly from you. But, so what we could do, if we ever do get one, obviously I can feed that information to you too.
Yeah.
So I want you to be aware of what's going on, so I try to put as much information through the weekly as possible so we can stay updated.
Okay, well, that would be helpful just to know the people using it.
Yeah, there may be issues about identifying
Yeah, we
exactly
don't
to
wanna-
whom it was
yeah.
paid, but
Right.
generally that it was paid, I think would be great.
Yeah, absolutely, I would like to share that win if we ever get someone to fill out the form.
I want the whole community to know that it's being used as well, so.
Yes.
Okay, great. That's a wrap on our final item. Chris, anything for upcoming agenda items you want us to know about?
No, I debated, though, there's a critical vacancy in the organization tied to the earlier discussion, that's our communications manager. So, get the word out, we want and need, and we've hired a recruiter, which we've not ordinarily done, but we have hired a recruiter to help us fill Derek Yeager's position. Running the 911 dispatch, question about turnover, one of the most challenging places to keep staff filled throughout the last 4 to 5 years. And you can see how critically important their work is. That industry from other city managers have changed substantially. So getting a top-notch person, Tom and Wayne both told me, Chris, you should not, there are plenty of people out there in the industry, whether we can attract one to relocate to Billings
Or afford them.
or afford them, you can't, the bottom line with this is, can you afford not to have someone running the dispatch center that's as engaged and interested in top-level best practice implementation as the police chief or the fire chief? I would say you can't. All three have to be thinking about that. So that recruitment has begun. Hopefully it will not take 6 months, another 6 months to fill that. But it is a critical position to public safety.
Is there any shortage of people answering the phone? Do we,
I'm not aware of like a big shortage over there that kind of stabilized. We're always running down, 1 or 2 over there, but I haven't heard of any big shortages.
Okay, if that's
Nothing
it,
else to report relative to agendas upcoming.
Great. Any items of council discussion? Any public comment on items not on our agenda?
I did have a
Councilmember
question
Nice?
regarding the snow. I was informed by our postal service that they couldn't deliver mail to Heights because of the way the streets were plowed. They couldn't get to some of the mailbox where the arterials and stuff were at. So, and everyone I've talked to said they weren't putting gates down, and so the driveways were all clogged up. And so that's something we need to try to work on. I know we get a lot of accolades for it because they do a great job. We also get some complaints, but this is one that needs to be.
you probably saw the pictures though, didn't you, the email?
I did, and Debbie and I
That was the
chatted.
downtown one.
Debbie and I
Same
chatted
idea,
about
though.
that today.
Yeah.
Bottom line is, we gotta have people helping each other. We don't get snow that often in this town, and there's 120,000 people, and they will first always focus on the high priority routes, which are not residential neighborhoods. So the residential neighborhoods end up deliberately being second category to the high priority, but that's opposite to deliveries and things like that, so.
So that's just to let you know that impacted the mail
Yeah,
delivery
sure.
sites. The other thing I was thinking about is I know they put gates down for driveways when they do it, because I know when
They
they
do
plow,
try, yeah.
They do try. But the bus stops are just as important for people to be able to try to get from the bus stop to the bus when they come by.
Sure.
They maybe could think about putting gates down for those when they see those, because otherwise they gotta try and climb over a mound of snow to get to the bus.
Sure.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, using those gates is really important, so we'll try to track that. Very good. Thank you, everybody. There was no public comment on non-agenda items, so we're adjourned.